Hey guys, tonight we are traveling back in time. Not just a few decades, but a few centuries. We're heading to 16th century Mughal India, a place of vibrant chaos, staggering wealth, and a very different kind of advertising. Forget pop-up ads and influencer marketing. We're going to explore how the most powerful emperors of the era used massive, breathtaking buildings as a form of personal and political branding. This is the story of how you sell an empire to its people, not with a jingle, but with marble and sandstone. And a word of warning. In this world, a poorly worded comment about the emperor's new palace won't just get you cancelled. It could get you, well, let's just say you probably wouldn't survive your first day. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Your support means the world. And as always, I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Drop a comment below and let me know. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing that hits you is the air. It's thick, warm, and carries a scent you can't quite place. A mixture of dust, cardamom, roasting meat, and a million flowers you don't have names for. You're standing on the edge of a road that's less of a road and more of a flowing river of people, animals, and carts. The noise is a constant. Gentle roar, the chatter of a dozen different languages, the bleating of goats, the rhythmic clang of a coppersmith's hammer somewhere nearby. This is the heart of a Mughal city, perhaps Agra or Delhi. In the middle of the 16th century, you, a traveler from another time, are completely invisible, a ghost in the machine. It allows you to observe. You see men in bright turbans haggling over silks, women in dazzling colors balancing water jugs on their heads with an effortless grace, and everywhere, a sense of raw, untamed energy. But beneath the chaos, there's an order. This empire, the Mughal Empire, is one of the richest and most powerful on earth. But how do they show it? There are no logos, no billboards, no flashing screens. The answer is all around you, but you have to look up, past the low-slung market stalls and the mud brick houses. You see them, the towering gateways of red sandstone, the swelling domes of white marble visible over the city walls, the slender minarets piercing the hazy sky. This is the Imperial brand, written in a language of stone and scale. The message is simple and overwhelming. We are the Mughals. We are powerful. We are sophisticated. And we are here to stay. This dynasty is, in the grand scheme of things, still relatively new to India. They are descended from Central Asian conquerors, Timur and Genghis Khan, a lineage that comes with a formidable reputation but also marks them as outsiders. The first emperor, Babur, swept in just a few decades ago, so they have a legitimacy problem. They need to convince the hundreds of millions of people in this vast, diverse land that their rule is not just an occupation, but a divinely ordained destiny. And they do it with architecture. Every art, every tile, every garden is a piece of propaganda, a carefully crafted statement of intent. You watch as a procession of nobles on horseback, clad in shimmering brocades, perch the crowd. They are heading towards the royal fort. The people on the street don't just move out of the way. Many of them stop and bow their heads, trying to catch a glimpse of the powerful men. This brings us to a fascinating piece of their public relations strategy, the concept of darshan. This is a Sanskrit term, deeply rooted in Hindu tradition, which means viewing or beholding. In a religious context, seeing an image of a deity is an act of worship that confers blessings. The Mughal emperors, clever as they were, co-opted this tradition for political purposes. The emperor would appear daily at a specific balcony, the Jiharo simply to be seen by his subjects. For the people below, this act of darshan was just celebrity spotting. It was a way of connecting with the semi-divine source of power and justice. The emperor's visibility was a key part of his brand, but as you blend back into the crowd, you can't help but notice the sheer diversity of the faces around you. Some with the high cheekbones of the Central Asian steppe, others with the darker, elegant features of the subcontinent. You'll hear Persian, the language of the court, mixed with local Hindustani dialects. It makes you ponder a question that historians still debate with surprising passion. Were the Mughals a foreign colonial power, imposing their culture on a conquered land? Or did they, over time, become a uniquely Indian dynasty, absorbing and being absorbed by the very place they ruled? There's no easy answer. The evidence for both arguments is right here, in the bustling street in front of you. The sun begins to set, casting a warm, orange glow on everything. The heat of the day finally begins to break. You look up again at those distant domes. In a world without photographs or the internet, these structures are how a ruler achieves a form of immortality. An emperor's life is fleeting, his power always contested, but a building can last for centuries. It is a message to the future, a way of ensuring that your brand, your story, outlives you, and you realize that the most profound and lasting statements of this empire aren't even the palaces for the living. They are the magnificent houses they built for their dead. And to understand the brand, you have to start at the beginning, with the tomb of the man who started it all. Your journey is a long one, a slow fade from the humid, bustling plains of Hindustan into a different world. The landscape changes. The earth itself seems to rise up to meet the sky, folding into the rugged, formidable mountains of the Hindu Kush. The earth ends, becoming crisp and cool. You've traveled northwest, back along the path of the original conquest, to the city of Kabul. This is the city that Babur, the founder of the Mughal dynasty, truly loved. It was his first conquest, his base of operations, and the place he yearned for even after he had won the unimaginable riches of India. To understand the powerful brand his descendants would build, you first have to understand the brand he chose for himself. And it's here, on a terrace slope overlooking the city, in a garden called Babur. There is no grand entrance. You walk up a series of stone steps, worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. Water channels, a key feature of a Persian-style garden, run down the center of the terraces, creating a gentle, constant sound of trickling water. It's a sound designed to soothe, to cool the air, and to remind you of life in an often arid land. The garden is planted with familiar things: roses, poppies, and the tall, elegant chêne are trees whose leaves rustle in the mountain breeze. It's orderly, peaceful, and feels deeply personal. And then you see it. The tomb of Zahir Udid in Muhammad Babur, the tiger, the first Padshah of the Mughal Empire. And you might just walk right past it. There is no colossal dome, no towering minarets, no glittering jewels. His grave is a simple marble enclosure, open to the sky. It is surrounded by a low, lattice screen, but the grave itself is exposed to the sun, the rain, and the snow. This was his specific instruction. He wanted nothing to separate him from the elements, to allow the blessings of heaven to fall directly upon his final resting place. It is staggeringly, profoundly humble for a man who conquered one of the world's richest lands. This, right here, is the genesis of the Mughal Imperial brand. It starts not with a roar, but a whisper. The key element is the garden itself. This is a charbagh, a 4-part garden, divided by water channels or walkways into a symmetrical quadrant. This wasn't just a landscaping choice. It was a powerful piece of symbolism. The charbagh was meant to be a terrestrial recreation of the paradise promised in the Quran. For a ruler, building one was a statement. It showed that he was a pious man. But it also showed his ability to impose order and rationality onto the wildness of nature. It was a metaphor for his rule. Just as he could make the flowers grow in neat rows and the water flow where he commanded, he could bring order and justice to the messy world of man. Babur's tomb established the garden as the essential setting for a Mughal memorial. Paradise was just a destination after death. It was something a powerful and refined ruler could build right here on earth. But there's a slightly strange and poignant story attached to this simple grave. A little-known fact that speaks volumes about the man. Babur died in Agra, the Indian city he famously complained about. In his memoirs, the Baburnama, one of the first true autobiographies in Islamic history, he wrote of India's heat, dust, and lack of good melons and grapes. He was a conqueror, but he was also homesick. So he was initially buried in a garden in Agra. It took nearly a decade for his wish to be moved to his beloved garden in Kabul to be honored. The details are fuzzy, but it's believed his Afghan wife, the Bmub or perhaps his grandson, Akbar, finally arranged for his remains to be brought here, to this mountainside, where his grave could overlook the city and the land he truly considered home. His body made a longer journey in death than many people do in their entire lives. This simplicity, however, creates a puzzle that historians still love to pick apart. How do we reconcile this humble, nature-loving poet with the ruthless warlord who used cannons to shatter the armies of India and laid the foundation for a foreign dynasty? In modern-day Uzbekistan, where Babur was born, he is a national hero, a symbol of sophisticated Timurid culture. In India, his legacy is far more fraught, often seen as the beginning of a long period of subjugation. The man who requested a simple grave open to the sky is the same man whose name would, centuries later, be associated with one of the most contentious religious and political disputes in modern Indian history. He was both, of course, the sensitive poet and the brutal conqueror. People, especially emperors, are rarely simple. As you stand by the grave, the wind whispers through the chenar trees. You can feel the quiet confidence of the man buried here. He was the founder. His legacy was in the dynasty he created, not in a monument. He could afford to be humble in death because his life's work had been so audacious. But his successors would not have this luxury. His son, Humayun, would lose the empire and be cast into exile. When he finally regained his kingdom, he and his descendants knew they needed a new message. Humility was a brand for a founder who was sure of himself, for a dynasty that needed to prove it was permanent, that it was destined to rule. Something much bigger was required. Simplicity is a luxury a fledgling dynasty can't afford for long. The next tomb would have to be a statement of resilience, a declaration of permanence carved in stone. You find yourself back on the plains of India, in the sprawling, dusty city of Delhi. The air is thick with heat and the memory of recent turmoil. The brand is in crisis. The company, Mughal Empire Inc., has just been through a hostile takeover, followed by a dramatic and hard-won reacquisition. The Emperor Babur's son, Humayun, was not, to put it mildly, his father's equal in a fight. He was a scholar, an astronomer, a gentleman who was perhaps a bit too fond of his opium. He was ousted from his own kingdom by a more capable Afghan warlord, Shah Suri, and spent 15 long years in exile. A king with no crown, wandering through Persia and Afghanistan. When he finally reconquered Delhi, he had about a minute to enjoy it. Just a year later, in a moment of darkly comic tragedy, he heard the call to prayer while descending the stairs of his library. The Shah Mandal, being a devout man, he tried to kneel, but his foot caught in the hem of his robe, and he tumbled down the stone steps. He died a few days later from the head injury. It was an awkward, almost embarrassing end for an emperor. The dynasty was on shaky ground. Humayun's son, the great Akbar, was only a teenager. The empire needed a serious rebranding. It needed to project stability, power, and, most importantly, legitimacy. This is the context for the magnificent structure rising before you now, Humayun's tomb. As you approach, the contrast with Babur's grave in Kabul is breathtaking. This is not a humble garden tomb. This is a press release in red sandstone and white marble. You walk through a massive gateway that frames the main building perfectly, a classic trick of Mughal architecture. And there it is, set in the center of a huge, perfectly symmetrical char-bag garden. It's the first of its kind, the first of the grand Mughal mausoleums. It's a colossal square structure with chamfered corners, built on a vast, high plinth. The main building material is red sandstone, a stone that glows with a warm, almost living energy in the Indian sun. But it's elegantly accented with white marble. In the latticework of the windows, the outlines of the arches, and Most importantly, the massive, swelling double dome that crowns the whole thing. This was a major innovation, borrowed from Persian and Timurid architecture, and it would become the signature look of the Mughal brand for the next century. The outer dome provides the impressive height visible from afar, while an inner dome creates a more intimate, proportionate space for the chamber below. As you step inside, into the main burial chamber, the air cools dramatically. Light filters in through intricate JILs, or latticed screens, diaboling the floor in complex patterns. In the center is the cenotaph of Humayun, a simple, unmarked marble tomb. As is traditional in Islamic burial, the real grave lies in a chamber directly below. The sheer scale and perfect symmetry of the space are designed to inspire awe. This isn't just a tomb for a man. It's a monument to the restoration of a dynasty. The message is clear. We were gone, but now we are back, and we are more glorious than ever. Here's the quirky, lesser-known detail. This monumental rebranding effort was not commissioned by his son, the Emperor Akbar. It was commissioned by his wife, or, more accurately, his first wife and chief consort, Begum, also known as Haji Begum. After her husband's death, she was so consumed with grief that she dedicated the rest of her life, and a significant chunk of her fortune, to building this memorial. She even supervised the construction herself, living in a camp on site. She brought in Persian architects. Mirak Mirza Ghiy isn't his son, which is why the building has such a distinctly Persian feel. It was a project driven by love. Yes, but it was also an incredibly shrewd political move. In a world where a woman's power was often indirect, Begum used architecture to cement her husband's legacy and, by extension, her son Akbar's right to rule. She was the project manager for the most important branding campaign of the early Mughal Empire. This project, however, raises a question that architectural historians still actively debate. Is Humayun's tomb a purely Persian design transplanted onto Indian soil? Or is it the first truly Mughal building, a synthesis of foreign and native styles? The dome and the charbagh are clearly Persian, but the use of red sandstone and white marble as a color scheme, the elegant chhh small domed pavilions that adorn the roof, and certain construction techniques are distinctly Indian. Most scholars now see it as a beautiful fusion. The moment when the Timurid heritage of the Mughals began to merge with the rich architectural traditions of the land they now called home. This building wasn't just a copy. It was the start of a new visual language. You wander through the surrounding gardens, where smaller tombs house other members of the royal family. The whole complex is a dynastic statement. It's a necropolis, a city of the dead, designed to anchor the Mughal lineage to the soil of India. Standing here, you realize that this tomb was just looking backward to honor a dead emperor. It was looking forward. It set the precedent for everything that was to come. It was the prototype, the grand experiment that would be refined and perfected over the next century, culminating in the most famous tomb of all. The message had been sent. The Mughal brand was no longer just about a conquering hero in a simple garden. It was about divine right, sophisticated taste, and a power that could command stone and space on an epic scale. The teenage emperor, Akbar, was paying close attention. He was about to take this idea of branding through architecture and turn it into an entire city. You feel a shift in the atmosphere. The relative calm of Humayun's memorial garden melts away, replaced by an eerie, profound silence. You are walking through the courtyards of a ghost city. This is Fatehpur Sikri, a place that is both a masterpiece of imperial vision and a spectacular failure of urban planning. For a brief, brilliant period of about 14 years, this was the capital of the Mughal Empire under its greatest ruler, Akbar, and it is, perhaps, the most ambitious and personal branding exercise ever attempted by a monarch. Imagine a modern CEO deciding to build a brand new corporate headquarters from scratch in the middle of nowhere, designing every single building to reflect a new company philosophy. That's Fatehpur Sikri. Akbar, now a confident and powerful emperor, decided to move his capital here from the established city of Agra. The official reason was to honor a Sufi mystic, Sheikh Salim Chisti, who had correctly predicted the birth of Akbar's first son and heir, Jahangir. The site was considered auspicious, but the real reason was that Akbar wanted a blank canvas. He wanted to build a city that was a physical manifestation of his unique, syncretic vision for the empire. As you wander through the vast, interconnected courtyards, you notice something strange. Almost the entire city is built from the same material, red sandstone. The sheer uniformity of the color is stunning. It gives the city a cohesive, monolithic feel, as if it were carved from a single giant rock. This was a deliberate choice. It was Akbar's brand identity. You enter a large courtyard, the Diwan, or hall of public audience. This is where the emperor would conduct the daily business of the empire, listen to petitioners, and dispense justice, often in full view of his subjects. It's a huge, open space, lined with colonnades. It's impressive but standard, but then you are guided into a smaller, more intimate building, the D1IK has, or hall of private audience, and inside, you stop in your tracks. The room is a simple square, but in its center stands one of the most unusual structures in architectural history. A single, massive, intricately carved stone column. This column, known as the throne pillar or axis pillar, rises to the height of the upper windows, where it blossoms into a huge, circular platform. This platform is connected by four narrow stone bridges to the four corners of the room, where there were once galleries for Akbar's ministers. The emperor himself would sit on this central platform, suspended in the middle of the room, while his advisors debated below and around him. The symbolism is potent and audacious. Akbar is the central pillar, the axis mundi, the pivot around which the entire empire revolves. All lines of power and communication radiate from him. It's an architectural diagram of his absolute authority. Now for the weird little detail, the kind of thing that makes you love history. Look closely at the carvings on this central pillar. You'll see design elements inspired by Hindu temples, Islamic geometric patterns, and even perhaps Buddhist motifs. This was not an accident. Akbar was a fascinating and deeply unorthodox ruler. Though raised a Muslim, he was intensely curious about other faiths. He would spend hours in the Diwan-i has, not just with his Muslim courtiers, but with Hindu gurus, Jain monks, Parsi priests, and even Jesuit missionaries from Europe, hosting marathon theological debates that often went late into the night. He was trying to find the common truth in all religions, and he even tried to launch his own syncretic faith, the Din-i-Ilahi, or religion of God, with himself as its spiritual head. This pillar, with its blended architectural styles, was the logo for his personal brand of religious and cultural fusion. The true purpose of this central pillar, however, is one of those things historians still get into heated arguments about. While the throne theory is the most popular, some scholars suggest it was simply a very elaborate stand for a royal librarian to access manuscripts stored in the galleries. Others argue its function was purely symbolic, never actually used as a seat. A few even whisper that Akbar, who was rumored to suffer from epilepsy, may have designed it for safety during a seizure, though there's little evidence for that. The mystery of the pillar is part of its magic. It's a stone Rorschach test for how you see Akbar himself, as a megalomaniac, a philosopher king, or a brilliant political operator. But for all its architectural genius, Fatehpur Sikri had a fatal flaw. The master brand builder, Akbar, had overlooked one crucial piece of infrastructure, a reliable water source. The artificial lake that was supposed to supply the city was simply not adequate. After only 14 years as the glorious capital, the entire court packed up and moved back to Agra, the perfect city. The ultimate statement of Akbar's imperial philosophy was abandoned to the sun in the silence. You stand in the main courtyard as the sun sets, casting long shadows across the red stone. The silence is broken only by the chirping of birds nesting in the ornate carvings. Fatehpur Sikri is a ghost brand, a failed product launch, but what a magnificent failure. It tells you more about Akbar's ambition, his intellect, and his ego than any living city could. And it's a powerful reminder that even the grandest visions can be brought down by a simple, practical problem. The brand message was perfect. The product, unfortunately, was unusable. Your journey continues, taking you away from the silent, sun-baked sandstone of Fatehpur Sikri to the outskirts of Agra, a city that remained the bustling heart of the empire. You are here to see the final resting place of the man who built the ghost city, the great Emperor Akbar himself, given his life's work, the grand syncretic vision, the architectural audacity of Fatehpur Sikri, the sheer scale of his empire. You would expect his tomb to be the most magnificent statement of all. You'd expect a larger, more perfect version of his father Humayun's tomb. You'd expect a dome. But as you stand before Akbar's mausoleum at Sikandra, you are once again confronted with a puzzle. It's a huge, impressive structure. Yes, but it's also strange. It's a building that seems to argue with itself. A final, enigmatic statement from a complex man. The entrance is a spectacular gateway, a classic piece of Mughal branding. It's made of red sandstone, inlaid with intricate geometric patterns of white marble and colored stone. Soaring white marble minarets, one at each corner, rise elegantly into the sky. It's the first time such minarets are used on a Mughal gateway, a clear statement of imperial grandeur. The gate itself is so beautiful, so perfectly proportioned, that it feels like the main event. It promises a building of unparalleled magnificence within. You walk through the gate, into another vast jar-bagged garden, this one filled with grazing deer that lend it a serene, park-like atmosphere. And there, in the center, is the tomb. It's a towering, 5-story pyramid-like structure. The first 4 floors are made of the familiar red sandstone, composed of tiers of pillared pavilions on arches. It's powerful and fortress-like. But then you get to the top floor, and everything changes. The 5th story is an open-air courtyard, completely made of pure white marble, surrounded by exquisitely carved latticed screens. In the center of this courtyard, exposed to the sky, sits a false sarcophagus, a cenotaph, covered in delicate carvings. And that's it. There is no dome on a building of this scale. At the height of the Mughal Empire, the absence of a massive, crowning dome is a glaring, deliberate omission. It's like a sentence without a period. It's the architectural equivalent of a mic drop. Why would Akbar, or his son Jahangir who completed the tomb, choose this design? This is where you stumble upon a wonderful historical rabbit hole. The dominant theory is that the design reflects Akbar's own eclectic religious beliefs. The tiered, pyramidal structure is reminiscent of ancient Indian Buddhist viharas, monasteries, or certain Hindu temple designs. It breaks dramatically from the Persian-inspired, dome-topped tombs of his ancestors. The open-air cenotaph on the top floor, echoing his grandfather Babur's wish to be buried under the open sky, suggests a more personal, spiritual connection to the heavens. Unmediated by formal Islamic architecture, the building, like Akbar himself, is a hybrid, part Indian, part Persian, part imperial palace, part spiritual retreat. It refuses to be categorized. Here's the quirky tidbit. Though there are whispers in the historical record, mainly from a 17th century Jesuit traveler, that there was supposed to be a dome. Some accounts suggest the original plan included a massive marble dome to crown the whole structure, but it was either never built due to its constant engineering challenges, or it was built and subsequently collapsed. Emperor Jahangir, who finished the tomb after Akbar's death, might have just decided to leave it as it was, creating the unique building we see today. So was the missing dome a brilliant, syncretic design choice, or a massive construction blunder that was cleverly rebranded as intentional? The academic debate on this is fierce and fascinating. Was Akbar making a final, bold statement of his unique faith, the Din, i.e. by rejecting the traditional Islamic dome? Or was his son Jahangir simply cutting corners on his father's gargantuan project? Or is the story of the planned dome just a myth, The tomb's design is so unusual that historians have been arguing about its intent for centuries. It's a mystery that adds to the building's power. It forces you to ask questions. It makes you think about the man himself. You walk up the steep staircases to the top floor, the white marble cool under your feet. The intricately carved screens throw complex shadows across the courtyard. Standing here, in the open air, with the vast sky above you, you feel the spirit of the place. It doesn't have the awe-inspiring, soaring feeling of a great dome. Instead, it feels more contemplative, more intellectual. It's a tomb that reflects the mind of its occupant, questioning, unconventional, and ultimately, a little bit mysterious. The real tomb of Akbar lies deep below, in a simple, almost stark crypt, a powerful contrast to the elaborate structure above. It's a final reminder that, for all the imperial branding and architectural statements, the end is the same for everyone. As you leave Soikandra, you realize that Akbar's brand was never about simple, overwhelming power. It was about intellectual curiosity and bold, sometimes messy, attempt to forge a new identity. His tomb is not a perfect building, and that's why it's the perfect monument to him. Let's take a step back from the massive structures for a moment. You've seen the grand architectural statements, the towering silhouettes that shape the imperial skyline. But now, you're going to zoom in. The genius of the Mughal brand was just in its scale. It was in the fine print. You're going to get up close to the walls of these tombs and palaces, so close that your nose is almost touching the stone, and learn to read the detailed language of power that is written there. You are standing in front of a section of wall on Humayun's tomb. At first glance, it's a beautiful, decorative pattern, but look closer. These are not random designs. Every element is chosen for its symbolic meaning, a kind of visual code that any educated courtier of the time would have been able to read instantly. The first thing you notice is the geometry. The patterns are stunningly complex, based on interlocking stars and polygons. This isn't just for decoration. It's a reflection of a profound philosophical and scientific belief. In Islamic art, complex geometric patterns were seen as a representation of the underlying order and unity of the universe. They were a way to glimpse the divine mind without resorting to forbidden figurative images. Creating these perfect, endlessly repeating patterns was an act of intellectual devotion. For the emperor, covering his buildings in this divine geometry was a powerful visual metaphor. It said, "My rule is like this pattern, rational, ordered, perfectly balanced, and reflects a higher, cosmic truth." It was a claim to a divinely sanctioned intelligence. Next, you see the calligraphy. Snaking around the arches and framing the doorways are elegant bands of script, mostly verses from the Quran. This is more than just quoting scripture. The choice of verses was a carefully curated PR message. The verses chosen for tombs often spoke of paradise, the afterlife, and divine judgment, reinforcing the idea of the ruler as a pious man destined for heaven. On palaces and gateways, the inscriptions might be more political, praising the emperor, listing his titles, and declaring the date of construction, forever linking his name with the magnificent building. The style of the calligraphy itself was a status symbol. The flowing, elegant Nasta LIQ or the stately THU Luth scripts were art forms in their own right, and the ability to commission the best calligraphers was a sign of immense cultural refinement. Now for the really beautiful detail, the technique that would come to define the pinnacle of the Mughal brand, Pietrodora. You won't see much of it here on the early tombs, but you're getting a hint of it in the inlaid stone work. Instead of just carving patterns onto the surface, artisans would painstakingly carve out channels in the marble or sandstone. Then, they would cut small, perfectly shaped pieces of precious and semi-precious stones, lapis lazuli for blue, carnelian for red, jasper for yellow, jade for green, and fit them into these channels so perfectly that the surface felt completely smooth. It was like painting with stone. This technique, which reached its zenith under Shah Jahan, was incredibly expensive and time-consuming. It was the Mughal equivalent of a luxury watch, a subtle but unmistakable signal of immense wealth and taste. The message of Pietradoura was simple. We are so rich, we can afford to decorate our walls with jewels. Here's a fantastic, nerdy little tidbit for you. The Mughals did not invent the geometric patterns or the calligraphy, but they did perfect a unique form of architectural illusion. Look at the bands of calligraphy high up on a gateway. To you, standing on the ground, the letters appear to be perfectly uniform in size, but they aren't. The calligraphers and architects were masters of perspective. They knew that letters at the top of an arch would appear smaller to a viewer on the ground. So, they subtly and brilliantly increased the size of the letters as they went higher up. This masterful optical correction, which required incredible mathematical skill, creates an illusion of perfect uniformity. It's a trick designed to make the human eye perceive divine perfection. The use of symbols, however, leads to one of the most enduring debates among art historians. How much of this was conscious, deliberate propaganda, and how much was simply the conventional artistic language of the time? When an artisan carved a six-pointed star, was he thinking of its complex symbolic meaning, the union of the material and spiritual worlds, or was he just using a common decorative motif she'd been taught? Scholars go back and forth on this. Some see a highly codified, top-down program of imperial symbolism in every building. Others argue for a more organic process, where artisans used a shared visual vocabulary, and the meaning was more fluid and less centrally controlled. The truth, as is often the case, is probably somewhere in the middle. The emperor and his chief architects almost certainly dictated the major themes and inscriptions, but the individual craftsmen brought their own traditions and interpretations to the work. As you run your fingers over the cool, smooth surface of a sandstone panel, you realize that these walls are not silent. They are speaking. They are telling a story of faith, color, and science. They are using a language of geometry to talk about the cosmos, a language of calligraphy to talk about God, and a language of inlaid stone to talk about wealth. The grand scale of the tombs was the headline, but this was the body of the article, filled with carefully chosen words and images designed to convince you, the viewer, of the absolute and unquestionable greatness of the Mughal brand, the grandeur of the tombs, the intricacy of the carvings, the sheer audacity of building an entire city out of red sandstone. It all begs a very simple, modern question. Who paid for all this? You're now going to step away from the art and into the accounting department of the Mughal Empire, because a brand, no matter how divinely inspired, runs on cold, hard cash, and the Mughals had a truly staggering amount of it. You are in a provincial court, perhaps in Lahore or Ahmedabad. The air is thick with the smell of ink, paper, and muddy. Men in fine robes sit on cushions, surrounded by stacks of documents. These are the diners, the financial officers, the accountants who kept the imperial machine running. The wealth flowing through this room is almost incomprehensible. At its peak, the Mughal Empire was responsible for nearly a quarter of the world's GDP. It was, by a significant margin, the richest single state on the planet. So where did all this money come from? The primary source was land revenue. The empire had a sophisticated system of land surveys and tax assessment. The government claimed a share, often a very large share, of the agricultural produce of every village. This grain, cotton, and indigo was the bedrock of the imperial treasury. But there was also a flourishing trade in textiles, spices, and other goods that brought in customs duties and taxes. The silver flowed into the empire from the New World, through Europe and the Ottoman lands, to pay for Indian goods, filling the emperor's coffers. The system that organized both the military and the civil administration of this vast wealth was a stroke of genius. And it's our main historical point for today, the man-SAB system. Think of it as a combination of a feudal aristocracy and a corporate hierarchy. The emperor appointed nobles, called man-SABdars, to various ranks. Each rank, or man-SAB, came with two numbers. For example, O ding ding ding, R ding ding ding. The first numbers EAT determined the noble's personal status and salary. The second number saw what determined how many armed cavalrymen and horses he was required to maintain for the emperor's army, instead of a cash salary. A man Sabidor was typically granted a JAGIR, a temporary right to collect the revenue from a piece of land. He didn't own the land. He just had the right to its income for a period of time. From this income, he had to pay for his own lavish lifestyle, his personal staff, and maintain his contingent of soldiers. It was a brilliant system for the emperor. It outsourced the expensive and messy business of tax collection and military recruitment to his nobles. It also ensured their loyalty. A JAGIR could be taken away and reassigned at any time, so the nobles were constantly competing for the emperor's favor. Now for the weird detail that shows the human side of this system. How did the emperor keep these powerful nobles in check and prevent them from building their own little kingdoms? One method was constant rotation. A noble might be the JAGIR of a region in Bengal 1 year, and then be abruptly reassigned to Gujarat the next. This prevented them from putting down deep local roots. But another, more peculiar method was the system of Eshiate. The term, known as Siyabt in Persian, meant that when a high-ranking noble died, his entire personal fortune, his cash, his jewels, his luxurious household goods, was immediately seized by the state. The emperor would then, as an act of grace, give a portion of it back to the noble's heirs, but he would keep the lion's share. This was a powerful tool. It meant that no matter how rich a noble became in his lifetime, he couldn't create a permanent, independent dynasty to challenge the Mughals. It also meant the emperor had a regular, if slightly morbid, source of supplementary income. This system of Eshiate is, of course, a source of historical debate. How strictly was it really enforced? Some sources, particularly European travelers who were often prone to exaggeration, painted it as a brutally efficient system of royal confiscation that discouraged any long-term investment. They argued it created a spend-it-while-you've-got-it mentality among the nobles. Why build a beautiful mansion or a public work if the emperor was just going to take it when you die? But many modern historians argue that the reality was more complex. The confiscation was often more of a temporary sealing of assets while debts to the state were calculated. In many cases, sons did inherit a significant portion of their father's wealth and status. The debate centers on whether the system was a primary cause of economic stagnation or a pragmatic tool of political control. You watch as a noble, a man Sabidor of high rank, sweeps into the realm. The accountants bow low. He is here to get the accounts for his JAGIR approved. His robes are made of silk so fine it seems to shimmer. A huge emerald glitters on his turban. This is where the money for the tombs came from. When an emperor decided to build a grand mausoleum, it was funded from a simple line item in the imperial budget. The cost was distributed. He might assign the revenue from a particularly wealthy province directly to the construction project. He would ask his high-ranking man Sabidors for massive donations. He would use the wealth accumulated through Eshiate from deceased nobles. The immense cost of the Taj Mahal, for example, was just a drain on the central treasury. It was a burden felt across the entire administrative system. The funding of these PR campaigns was a collective effort, powered by the agricultural surplus of millions of peasants and administered by a legion of ambitious, perpetually insecure nobles. Understanding the man Sabidori's system is key to understanding how these architectural dreams were made real. They were built on a foundation not just of stone, but of a complex and ruthless system of financial and political control. You've seen the vision of the emperors, the designs of the architects, and the flow of money from the treasury. But now, it's time to shift your focus. You're going to walk away from the royal courts and the audience halls and head towards the scaffolding. You're going to look at the hands that actually built these monuments. For every emperor with a grand idea, there were tens of thousands of unnamed, unpraised people whose skill, sweat, and lives were poured into the foundations of these tombs. The sound is the first thing you notice. A rhythmic, percussive symphony of thousands of people at work. It's the sharp tink, tink, tink of 1,000 chisels on marble, the duller thud of mallets on sandstone, the grating sound of massive stone blocks being dragged on rollers. and the shouts of foremen in a dozen languages. You are at the construction site of a major Mughal project. Let's imagine it's AK bars to maths I can draw. The scale of the human effort is almost as overwhelming as the building itself. You see long lines of laborers, men and women, carrying baskets of rubble on their heads. You see teams of massive oxen straining to pull carts laden with stone from the quarries. You see the blacksmiths at their forges, their faces glowing in the firelight as they sharpen tools and forge iron clamps. The whole site is a hive of organized, relentless activity, a temporary city dedicated to a single purpose. Historians estimate that a project like the Taj Mahal employed over 20 Zara workers for more than 2 decades. Let's look closer at who these people were. They were not a single, unified workforce. They were a highly specialized and stratified society of artisans, drawn from all across the Mughal Empire and beyond. There were the quarrymen, who had the dangerous job of cutting the massive blocks of marble and sandstone from the earth. There were the brickmakers, baking millions of clay bricks for the inner structures and scaffolding. Then there were the master stonemasons and carvers, the true artists, who could transform a rough block of stone into a delicate, lace-like jolly screen. There were the calligraphers, who would design the inscriptions on paper, and the specialized carvers who would translate their elegant script into stone. There were the inlay artists, the birchen cars, hunched over small pieces of lapis and carnelian, grinding them into the perfect shape. And there were countless general laborers, who did the back-breaking work of lifting, tarrying, and mixing mortar. This brings us to a fascinating and often overlooked detail: the signature of the artist. In the West, during the Renaissance, artists like Michelangelo and Leonardo were celebrities. They signed their work, and their personal fame was part of their value. In Mughal India, the system was different. The concept of individual artistic genius was subsumed by the glory of the patron, the emperor. The vast majority of the artisans who built these masterpieces remain completely anonymous. Their names are lost to history. However, every so often, you find a tiny, hidden exception on a few Mughal buildings. If you look very, very closely in an obscure corner, you can sometimes find a tiny inscription with the name of a master craftsman or calligrapher. It might be a name like Lut engineer, or a man, a conspiracy, calligrapher. These are incredibly rare and precious finds. They are the whispers of individual identity in a system that was designed to glorify the collective brand of the empire. But who were these master craftsmen, and where did they come from? The Mughals were brilliant talent scouts. They brought in experts from all over their vast realm and from neighboring cultures. The chief architect of Humayun's tomb was famously Persian. For the Taj Mahal, the records, which are themselves a subject of debate, list masters from across India, from Persia, from the Ottoman Empire, and even, some say, from Europe. A calligrapher might be brought from Shiraz in Persia, an expert in dome construction from Istanbul, and a master of marble carving from Rajasthan. The construction site was a melting pot of artistic traditions and techniques. This is a key reason why Mughal architecture became a unique synthesis. It was just the emperor's vision. It was the physical blending of the skills of 1,000 different hands, from a dozen different homelands. This, of course, leads to a historical debate that touches on the ethics of our admiration for these buildings. Were these workers happy artisans, proud to be contributing to a magnificent, divinely inspired project? Or were they essentially forced laborers, conscripts working under harsh conditions for little pay? The answer is not simple, and historical records are often biased towards the court's perspective. Most of the skilled artisans were well-paid professionals who were highly sought after. They likely lived in relative comfort in the small towns that grew up around the construction sites. But the vast army of unskilled laborers, their situation was almost certainly far more precarious. They were likely paid a subsistence wage and were subject to the harsh discipline of the foreman. There are no records of a workers' strike at the Taj Mahal. Dissent was not a viable option. So, when we admire the perfect symmetry of a garden or the delicate tertiary of a screen, we are also looking at a monument to a rigid social hierarchy. The beauty we see was built on a system of immense, unquestioned power, where the lives and labor of thousands were considered a resource to be used in the service of the emperor's quest for eternal glory. Uwaj is a block of white marble, destined to become part of a minaret, is slowly hoisted into the air with a complex system of ropes and pulleys, powered by a team of men and oxen. The process is slow, dangerous, and requires incredible coordination. A single mistake could be fatal. It's a powerful reminder that these ethereal, heavenly buildings were born from the most earthly of things: rock, iron, wood, and the endless, patient labor of human hands. The air in the Imperial court is changing. The robust, masculine energy of Akbar's era, with its focus on conquest, administration, and syncretic religious debate, is beginning to soften. You've moved forward in time to the early 17th century, to the reign of Akbar's son, Sulim, who takes the throne named Jahangir, meaning conqueror of the world. But while his name projected martial strength, his passions lay elsewhere. Jahangir was a connoisseur, an aesthete, a man obsessed with the specific and the beautiful. He was more interested in commissioning a hyper-realistic painting of a rare falcon than in planning a military campaign. And his reign is defined by one of the most remarkable power couples in Indian history, himself and his wife, the Empress Noor Jahan. Together, they would subtly but surely shift the Mughal imperial brand away from Akbar's grand, monolithic statements and towards something more refined, more elegant, and more exquisitely detailed. You are in the imperial court, but the center of gravity is not always the emperor's throne. It's often in the Zen Hall, the women's quarters, where Noor Jahan holds sway. She was not born to be an empress. She was the daughter of a Persian noble who had fallen on hard times. She was first married to a military officer and was a widow with a daughter when she caught the eye of the emperor. Jahangir was so captivated by her beauty, intelligence, and ambition that he married her, and she quickly became the most powerful woman in the empire. Her name, Noor Jahan, means light of the world, a title given to her by her adoring husband. She was an empress in all but name. Her image and name were struck on the coinage alongside the emperor's, an unprecedented honor. She issued royal decrees, managed vast estates, and was a key political advisor. Jahangir, who struggled with addiction to alcohol and opium for much of his life, was increasingly happy to let his brilliant wife run the empire while he pursued his interests in art and nature. This transfer of power was the talk of the court and the scandal of the empire. This power couple's shared aesthetic taste is where the brand pivot happens. Jahangir was a passionate naturalist. His memoirs, the Tugi Jahangiri, are filled with wonderfully precise and loving descriptions of flowers, animals, and birds. He would have his court artists paint the tulips of Kashmir or a turkey brought by the Jesuits with scientific accuracy. This love for natural, floral motifs begins to creep into the architecture. The rigid geometry of Akbar's era starts to be softened by flowing, realistic depictions of irises, lilies, and poppies carved in stone and painted on walls. Noor Jahan, with her Persian background and exquisite taste, championed a new kind of luxury. She favored elegance over sheer size. She popularized new styles of textiles and jewelry. And, most importantly for our story, she became a major architectural patron. She commissioned gardens, mosques, and caravanserais as roadside inns. But her most significant contribution would be a tomb, not for her husband, but for her father. This project would become the laboratory for the next phase of the Mughal brand. Here's a quirky little detail that reveals the dynamic of their relationship. While Jahangir was the conqueror of the world, Noor Jahan was the one who actually had to save him from being conquered. In 1626, a rebellious general named Mahabad Khan managed to capture Emperor Jahangir in a daring raid on the imperial camp. The entire empire held its breath, while the male generals dithered. Noor Jahan took charge. She personally tried to lead a rescue mission on a war elephant across a raging river, and when that failed, she cleverly arranged to be captured herself so she could join her husband in his tent. From inside the enemy camp, she used her wits and political skill to sow dissent. organize a secret counter-coup, and ultimately secure her husband's release. She was a brilliant strategist and a woman of incredible courage. She was just an aesthetic influence. She was the CEO keeping the company afloat. The influence of this power couple, however, raises a continuous debate for historians. Who was the primary driver of the artistic shift during this period? Was it Jahangir, with his deep love for the natural world and painting, or was it Nur Jahan, the powerful patron with her refined Persian taste and boundless ambition? For a long time, historians, mostly male, tended to attribute the significant developments to Jahangir, casting Nur Jahan as a woman of fashion who was simply a muse. But more recent scholarship has forcefully brought her role to the forefront, arguing that she was the active, driving force behind the new aesthetic. She was the project manager, the visionary, the one with the checkbook. The truth is likely that their tastes were beautifully aligned. They were partners in life, in power, and in art. As you observe the court, you see the changes everywhere. You see nobles wearing more delicate fabrics. You see paintings that value psychological realism over stiff formality. You hear poetry that speaks of love and nature rather than epic battles. The entire sensory environment of the empire is being recalibrated. The brand is becoming more luxurious, more intimate, and more self-consciously artistic. This evolution was not a sudden revolution but a slow, graceful transition, and it would all be crystallized in a single, game-changing building that Nur Jahan was about to commission. A tomb so jewel-like and perfect that it would forever change the face of Mughal architecture. You are standing on the banks of the Yamuna River in Agra, the imperial capital. The sun glints off the water, and the air is filled with the familiar sounds of the city. But you're not looking at the main fortress or the grand mosques. Your attention is fixed on a smaller, more intimate building that seems to shimmer in the hazy light. It's perfectly proportioned, immaculately white, and decorated with a finesse you haven't seen before. You are looking at the tomb of an image Uddlah, and you are essentially looking at the prototype for the Taj Mahal. This is the tomb that the powerful Empress Nur Jahan built for her father, Mirza Ghiz Beg, who had served as Jahangir's chief minister and was given the title Imid Uddlah, or Pillar of the State. His death in 1622 gave Nur Jahan the opportunity to make a major statement, not just of filial piety, but of her own taste in power. And what a statement it is. The tomb is often called the baby Taj or the jewel box, and for good reason. Compared to the massive, masculine sandstone structures of Humayun or Akbar's tombs, this building is small, delicate, and almost feminine in its elegance. It's set in a modest charbagh garden, maintaining the classic Mughal layout. But the innovations are immediately obvious. First, this is the very first Mughal tomb to be constructed almost entirely of white marble. The red sandstone that had defined the brand for generations has been relegated to a supporting role in the gateways and accents. The choice of pure white marble from the quarries of Makran in Rajasthan was a conscious move towards a new aesthetic of pristine, almost divine purity. It was also incredibly expensive, a clear signal of the wealth and influence of its patron, Nur Jahan. But the real revolution is on the surface. You step closer, and your breath catches. The walls are not just carved, they are encrusted with decoration. This is the first building to make extensive, comprehensive use of pietra dura, the technique of inlaying semi-precious stones into the marble. The entire exterior surface is a tapestry of intricate patterns. You see delicate floral sprays, wine flasks, and elaborate geometric designs, all rendered not in paint, but in carnelian, lapis lazuli, onyx, and topaz. It's as if the building has been draped in a permanent, jeweled carpet. This is the aesthetic of Jahangir Nur Jahan made manifest. The love of nature, the Persian motifs, the taste for exquisite, luxurious detail. Here's a wonderful little detail for the art history nerds. If you look closely at the inlay work, you can see two distinct styles. On the outside of the tomb, the designs are more geometric and formal, a nod to the established artistic traditions. But once you step inside, The decoration becomes more fluid and pictorial. The walls of the inner chambers are covered with images of Persian art inspiration, vases overflowing with flowers, scent bottles, and even, very subtly, images of animals and birds hidden within the scrolling vines. This was a bold move. Strict Islamic tradition often discourages pictorial representation, especially in a tomb. The use of these images shows the confidence of the patrons, a willingness to push artistic boundaries in the pursuit of beauty. The interior feels less like a tomb and more like a celestial pleasure pavilion. This building is so unique and so pivotal that it has sparked a significant debate among scholars. Is the tomb of Imad the final, perfect expression of Jahangir's reign? Or is it the first statement of the era to come? The era of Shah Jahan. Nur Jahan was Shah Jahan's stepmother and, eventually, his bitter political rival. It's a fascinating irony of history that the tomb she built to cement her own family's legacy would become the direct architectural inspiration for the tomb her stepson would build for his wife. Shah Jahan would take every single innovation you see here, the white marble, the Pietro Dore inlay, the delicate floral motifs, and amplify them on an epic, almost unbelievable scale for the Taj Mahal. This tomb was the proof of concept. It showed that it was possible to sheath an entire building in bejeled marble. It was the successful test flight that made the moon landing possible. As you walk through the quiet, cool chambers, you notice how the light, filtered through the marble jolly screens, makes the inlaid stones on the walls seem to glow from within. The central chamber houses the cenotaph of Nur Jahan's father and mother, made from a single piece of luminous yellow marble. The whole atmosphere is one of quiet, opulent reverence. It's a building designed to be appreciated up close, to be touched, to be admired for its flawless craftsmanship. This tomb represents a fundamental shift in the Mughal brand's promise. The earlier tombs promised power and permanence through scale. This tomb promises it through perfection. It suggests that Mughal rule is not just strong, it is also impossibly refined. It has moved beyond the need to shout its greatness with massive sandstone fortresses and can now whisper it through the language of jewels and flowers. The pillar of the state may be buried here, but the tomb is the true pillar of a new age of Mughal art. A jewel box that held the design DNA for the world's most beautiful building. Your journey takes you away from the imperial heartland of Agra and Delhi. Traveling northwest once again, you cross the plains of Punjab and arrive in the ancient, vibrant city of Lahore, a major provincial capital and a place where Emperor Jahangir loved to hold court. He is an old man now. The years of indulgence have taken their toll. His rebellion-plagued reign is nearing its end. And when he dies in 1627 while traveling back from his beloved Kashmir, the question of his final resting place becomes a matter of imperial significance. You find yourself in a vast, sprawling garden complex in the suburb of Shadara, on the banks of the Ravi River. The feeling here is different from the other tombs. It's less a single, monumental statement and more a serene, almost pastoral landscape. This is the tomb of Jahangir, and it is a perfect reflection of the man himself, a lover of nature, a man of refined but not bombastic taste, and an emperor who, in the end, seems more at peace in a garden than in a palace. The first thing you notice is what's missing. Just like Akbar's tomb, there is no central dome. But here, the effect is entirely different. The main tomb is a massive, single-story square building with a low, flat roof. It's a plinth, a platform, rather than a towering edifice. At each corner stands a tall, graceful minaret, decorated with intricate zigzag patterns of colored marble. The lack of a dome gives the whole structure a sense of groundedness, of being part of the earth rather than soaring away from it. This was a deliberate choice, and some historical accounts suggest it was Jahangir's own wish to have a tomb that was open to the elements. Much like his great-grandfather Babur, you walk across the vast courtyard, which was once a classic charbagh, to the entrance of the mausoleum. The exterior walls are faced with red sandstone, but they are extensively decorated with panels of inlaid marble featuring rich floral motifs and swirling array boxes. It's a continuation of the aesthetic you saw at Imad Udid Allah's tomb. but on a grander, more stately scale. Stepping inside, you enter a world of painted and tiled beauty. The inner chambers are a kaleidoscope of color. The walls are covered in breathtakingly intricate frescoes of flowers and plants, a direct reflection of Jehangir's lifelong passion for botany. The ceilings are decorated with ornate plasterwork in a honeycomb pattern known as Mughal, and in the center of it all lies the cenotaph. It is a masterpiece, made of pure white marble. Its surfaces are covered in the most delicate pietra dura inlay. The inlay work forms flowing floral patterns and, most importantly, the 99 names of Allah, rendered in exquisite black calligraphy. It is a work of supreme artistry and devotion, a final, quiet statement of faith. But here's the slightly unusual and revealing detail about this tomb complex. It's not just for him. Right next to the main garden is another, separate enclosure that houses the tomb of his brother-in-law, Asaf Khan, who was Nur Jahan's brother, and nearby once stood the tomb of the Empress Nur Jahan herself. After Jehangir's death, she was sidelined by her stepson, Shah Jahan, and lived out her final years in quiet retirement in Lahore, funding her own, much more modest, tomb from her pension. The whole area became a dynastic necropolis for Nur Jahan's family. This proximity has led to a great deal of historical speculation. Was this planned? Did Jehangir envision a family resting place here? The construction of this tomb sparks a contentious debate among Pakistani and Indian historians. Who was the primary patron? The official narrative, promoted by Shah Jahan's court historians, is that he, the devoted son, built this magnificent tomb for his father. But Nur Jahan was still incredibly powerful and wealthy when Jehangir died, and she remained in Lahore. Many scholars argue that she was the original driving force behind the design and initial construction, and that Shah Jahan simply completed the project after he had secured the throne and exiled her. The tomb style, particularly its lack of a dome and its emphasis on frescoes and inlay, feels more aligned with the aesthetic of Jehangir and Nur Jahan than with the architectural vision Shah Jahan would later develop. Attributing the tomb to Shah Jahan was a way for him to retroactively write his powerful stepmother out of the imperial narrative, claiming this final act of filial piety for himself. As you stand by the marble cenotaph, you can feel the personality of the emperor. This is not the tomb of a world conqueror, despite his name. It is the tomb of a man who found divinity in the delicate veins of a leaf and the vibrant plumage of a bird. He chose a garden for his final home, a place where nature's beauty could be a permanent part of his memorial. The brand message here is one of sophisticated, nature-loving piety. It suggests that the ultimate power is not in commanding armies, but in appreciating the subtle artistry of God's creation. The tomb of Jehangir is often overlooked, overshadowed by the architectural titans in Agra and Delhi, but it is a crucial part of the story. It is the final, and perhaps most personal, statement of the Jahangiri era. It's a quiet pause, a moment of gentle, artistic reflection before the arrival of the next emperor, a man whose ambition would once again turn the volume of Mughal architecture up to its maximum setting, swapping the quiet beauty of a garden for the jaw-dropping perfection of paradise on earth. Let's pause our chronological journey for a moment and go back to the garden. You've seen it now at every major tomb. Babur's humble terrace in Kabul, Humayun's grand restored paradise, Akbar's sprawling park at Sikri, and Jehangir's serene final home in Lahore. The garden is not just a pretty setting for the main event. In the Mughal branding strategy, the garden is the event. It's a foundational piece of the message. And to understand the tombs, you have to understand the language of the gardens they sit in. You are strolling through a perfect, idealized charbagh that's placed you in the gardens of the Taj Mahal, the most perfect of them all. The scent of roses and jasmine hangs in the air. The sound of fountains masks the noise of the outside world. The visual harmony is absolute. This is a space designed to calm the mind and delight the senses. But it is also a space saturated with meaning. The core concept, as you know, is the charbagh, or Fatehpur garden, a central building, pavilion, or pool sits at the heart. and from it, four walkways or water channels radiate outwards, dividing the garden into four equal quadrants. This wasn't a Mughal invention. It's an ancient Persian concept, the paradisia from which we get our word paradise, which predates Islam. But the Mughals adopted it and infused it with their own potent symbolism. The symbolism works on multiple levels. On the most basic level, it's about control. Charbagh is nature, tame. It is the chaos of the wild world organized into straight lines, perfect right angles, and controlled flows of water. For an emperor, building such a garden was a microcosm of his rule. It demonstrated his power to bring order, symmetry, and rational design to his realm. It was a visual metaphor for the well-ordered state, where every person and every province had its proper place, all flowing from the central authority of the emperor. On a deeper, spiritual level, the Charbagh is a direct architectural representation of the paradise described in the Quran. The Holy Book speaks of a garden of delights, with lush greenery and, most importantly, rivers flowing beneath. The four channels of the Charbagh are often interpreted as the four rivers of paradise, one of water, one of milk, one of honey, and one of wine. By building such a garden on earth and placing his tomb within it, a Mughal emperor was making a bold theological claim. He was suggesting that his final resting place was a literal, physical gateway to heaven. He was creating a tangible piece of paradise for himself and, by extension, for his dynasty. Now for a specific, and rather clever, detail about the waterworks. The fountains and channels in a Mughal garden weren't just decorative. They were a form of pre-modern air conditioning. In the blistering heat of the Indian plains, the sight and sound of moving water had a powerful psychological cooling effect, but it was also physical. The evaporation from the large surface area of the channels and pools would genuinely lower the ambient temperature in the garden, creating a comfortable microclimate. The engineering required to make this work was immense. The water was typically raised from a nearby river using a complex system of animal-powered water wheels, Persian wheels, and fed into aqueducts that supplied the garden. The engineers had to calculate the gradients with incredible precision to ensure a steady, gentle flow throughout the entire complex. This display of hydraulic engineering was yet another subtle brand message. We are not just powerful, we are masters of science and technology. The precise layout of the tombs within these gardens, however, has been a source of ongoing academic discussion. In the classic Persian style, the main pavilion or building is supposed to be in the exact center of the Charbagh, at the intersection of the four channels. Humayun follows this pattern perfectly. The tomb is the central pivot around which the paradise garden revolves. But Babur tomb in Kabul is at the top of a terraced garden, overlooking it. Jahangir's tomb in Lahore is in the center. But then you have the great exception, the Taj Mahal. The main mausoleum is not in the center of the garden. It is placed at the far end, on a terrace overlooking the river. Why this break from tradition? Historians have been debating this for years. One theory is that it was a practical choice, using the river as a scenic backdrop and a natural defensive barrier. Another, more poetic theory suggests that the garden in front of the Taj is not the whole garden. Some scholars argue that the river itself was meant to be incorporated as one of the rivers of paradise, and that there was a legendary moonlit garden, the Fatehpur, on the opposite bank, making the Taj the centerpiece of a much larger, river-bisected cosmic plan. The debate over the Taj's placement shows how the Mughals were not just lavishly copying a template. They were adapting and innovating the Charbagh concept to create even more powerful and specific symbolic meanings. As you sit on a marble bench, you watch as a gardener carefully tends to a bed of tulips. The choice of plants was also symbolic. Bush trees represented death and eternity, while fruit trees represented life and renewal. The cycle of the seasons within the garden, the blossoming of flowers, the ripening of fruit, the falling of leaves, was a constant, living reminder of the cycle of life, death, and resurrection. So when you look at a Mughal tomb, never forget the garden. It's not just the frame for the picture. It's the foundation of the entire ideological structure. It's a statement of control, a map of paradise, a feat of engineering, and a living, breathing poem in praise of the emperor's eternal glory. The atmosphere of the empire shifts once more. The refined, poetic aesthetic of Jahangir and Nur Jahan gives way to a new era of formality, grandeur, and an almost obsessive pursuit of architectural perfection. You are now in the court of Emperor Shah Jahan. If the Mughal Empire were a company, he would be the CEO who is obsessed with the brand's image above all else. He is not the warrior founder like Babur, nor the intellectual philosopher like his grandfather Akbar, nor the aesthete naturalist like his father Jahangir. He is, first and foremost, the builder king. His name itself is a brand statement. Born Prince Kuran, he was given the title Shah Jahan, King of the World, by his father after a successful military campaign. But he would make his name not by conquering the world, but by building on it. From the moment he secures the throne, after a fairly ruthless war of succession against his brothers, he begins a systematic and staggeringly expensive program of architectural commissioning. His goal is to transform the visual identity of the Mughal Empire, to reforge it in his own image, one of divine authority, absolute order, and flawless, crystalline beauty. You are standing in the fort at Agra, a place that has been the seat of power for generations. But it feels different now. Shah Jahan has been renovating. He has torn down many of the earlier red sandstone structures built by his grandfather, Akbar, within the fort. In their place, he has erected a series of exquisite white marble pavilions. You walk through the Diwan-i-Im, the hall of public audience, where Akbar's hall at Fatehpur Sikri was made of sandstone. This one is a fine white plaster, polished to a marble-like sheen. At its head is a stunning marble baldachin, or throne canopy, its walls covered in the delicate pietra dura inlay work that has become his signature. This is the central theme of the Shah Jahani brand, the replacement of red sandstone with white marble. For him, sandstone was the color of the military camp, of earthly power. White marble was the color of purity, of sainthood, of heaven itself. By systematically rebuilding the imperial spaces in this pristine material, he was sending a clear message. The Mughal dynasty was no longer a temporary, tinkering tower. It was a permanent, divinely sanctioned institution, as pure and eternal as the marble of its palaces. You are granted a glimpse into his personality. Court chronicles describe him as formal, dignified, and immensely proud. He maintained a strict court etiquette that was a world away from the more relaxed atmosphere of his father's reign. He was a devout and orthodox Sunni Muslim, unlike his heterodox grandfather, and he had an almost fanatical obsession with symmetry and architectural detail. He would personally inspect the plans for his buildings, ordering changes and demanding a level of perfection that drove his architects and artisans to the limits of their abilities. Now for a specific and revealing piece of his branding strategy. Look at the floral carvings on his buildings. Under Jahangir, the flowers were depicted with a naturalist's love and accuracy. They were real flowers you could find in a garden. Under Shah Jahan, the flowers become stylized, perfected, and otherworldly. They are not illustrations of real plants, but idealized floral forms, perfectly symmetrical and often inlaid with precious stones. This is a subtle but profound shift. Shah Jahan is not interested in depicting the beauty of the world as it is. He is interested in creating a vision of a more perfect, heavenly world. His artists were not tasked with realism, but with idealism. This stylized floral decoration became the official logo of his reign. This obsession with creating a heavenly ideal on earth has sparked a fascinating debate among historians about his motivations. Was Shah Jahan's building program a simple expression of his ego and love for opulence? Or was there a deeper political and theological agenda at play? Some scholars, like the influential historian Ebba Koch, argue that Shah Jahan was consciously using architecture to project a very specific image of himself as a semi-divine ruler. They point to the symbolism in his throne rooms, with their celestial canopies and light-filled halls, as evidence that he was presenting himself as the shadow of God on earth, a perfect ruler presiding over a perfect kingdom. The architecture was just beautiful. It was a carefully constructed piece of political theology, designed to elevate the emperor to a near-divine status. Other historians are more cautious, seeing his projects as the culmination of a century of imperial artistic development, driven as much by personal taste and dynastic pride as by a complex theological program. As you walk through the marble pavilions of Agra Fort, you look out over the Yamuna River. The sun is setting, and the white buildings seem to glow, absorbing the soft colors of the sky. Everything is orderly, symmetrical, and breathtakingly expensive. This is the empire at its zenith. Its power and wealth so absolute that it can afford to build paradise. Shah Jahan is the ultimate brand manager, meticulously controlling every aspect of the imperial image, from court ritual to the carve of a marble flower. He has already built palaces, forts, and a whole new capital city, Syodjanabad, in Delhi. But his greatest project, the one that would define his brand for all time, has not yet begun. That project would not be born from ambition, but from tragedy. A personal loss would soon provide the catalyst for the creation of the most famous and beloved piece of propaganda in human history. The king of the world was about to become the world's most famous monarch. The year is 1631. The imperial court is not in a grand palace in Agra or Delhi, but in a military camp in Burhanpur, a provincial city in central India. Shah Jahan is on campaign, suppressing a rebellion. The mood, which should be one of imperial confidence, is thick with anxiety. You are a silent observer outside the royal tent, where the emperor's beloved wife, Harjiman Banu Begum, better known by her title, Taj Mahal, the chosen one of the palace, is in labor. She has been his constant companion for 19 years, his chief advisor, and the love of his life. This is her 14th childbirth. The proceedings are long and difficult. After more than 30 hours of agonizing labor, she delivers a healthy baby girl, but she herself suffers a catastrophic postpartum hemorrhage. The end comes quickly. She dies in her husband's arms. The grief that engulfs Shah Jahan is absolute and all-consuming. The court chronicles, which are usually formal and reserved, describe a man utterly broken. They say he went into seclusion for a week, and when he emerged, his hair had turned white. He eschewed music, colorful clothes, and perfumes for 2 years. The entire court was ordered into official mourning. The most powerful man in the world was inconsolable. This moment of profound personal tragedy is the spark. It's the emotional core of the story that will become the Taj Mahal. But Shah Jahan, the consummate brand manager, will channel this raw, personal grief into a strategic, public statement of epic proportions. The memorial for his wife will become much more than a tomb. It will be the ultimate expression of his imperial and spiritual vision. Mumtaz Mahal's body is temporarily buried in a garden in Burhanpur. But this is not a fitting final resting place for the empress of the world's richest empire. Shah Jahan immediately begins planning a mausoleum for her on the banks of the Yamuna River in Agra, a site visible from his personal palace in the Agra fort. He envisions a tomb of unparalleled beauty, a monument that will be a testament to his love and her memory for all eternity. He wants to build her a Rousey Imuna W or a luminous tomb. That would be the envy of the world. The land he chooses for the tomb is a garden estate belonging to a high-ranking noble, Roya Jai Singh. Here we find a slightly awkward, often glossed-over detail of the story. The emperor didn't just take the land. The official records state that he exchanged it, giving the Raya a large palace in the city of Agra in return for the riverside plot. While technically an exchange, it's safe to assume it was an offer the Raya could not refuse. The location was perfect, prestigious, scenic, and, most importantly, it allowed the emperor to gaze upon his wife's final resting place from his own balcony. This decision to build such a monument was not without controversy. Even at the time, Orthodox Islamic theology is often austere when it comes to funerary practices, frowning upon extravagant tombs and monumental graves. Building such a lavish and expensive mausoleum, especially for a woman, was a bold and potentially controversial move. It required a powerful justification. This is where the historical debate begins. A debate about the true motivation behind the Taj Mahal. Was it purely an act of love? A grieving husband's extravagant tribute to his wife? This is the story that has captured the world's imagination. The narrative of the Taj is the ultimate romantic gesture. It's a powerful and emotionally resonant story, and it was certainly the primary official narrative. However, many historians argue that while the grief was undoubtedly genuine, Shah Jahan's motivations were far more complex. He was not just a husband, he was an emperor, and every act, even an act of mourning, was a political one. By building the most magnificent tomb on earth, he was also building a monument to the power and glory of his own reign. It was a statement that only an empire as wealthy and sophisticated as the Mughals could produce such a wonder. Furthermore, as we will see, the design of the tomb was deeply infused with theological symbolism that was meant to glorify not just Mumtaz, but the emperor himself and the divine justice of his rule. The argument is not that the love story is false, but that it's only part of the picture. The personal tragedy became the catalyst for a grand strategic project, a way to merge the narrative of romantic love with the narrative of imperial power. You watch as the site by the river is prepared. The ground is excavated and filled to create a stable foundation. The first blocks of marble begin to arrive. The emperor's personal grief is slowly being transformed, alchemized into a public work of art. The memory of a woman is about to be immortalized, but her monument will also become the everlasting symbol of her husband's brand. The strategy is set. The love story will be the headline, the emotional hook, but the building itself will tell a deeper, more complex story about power, faith, and the eternal nature of the Mughal throne. The world's greatest branding exercise has just begun. The construction site on the bank of the Yamuna River is now the most important place in the empire. Shah Jahan, channeling his grief into an obsessive focus on perfection, is assembling his dream team. This isn't a simple construction project. It's the Apollo program of the 17th century, requiring the absolute best minds and hands the world has to offer. You are now a fly on the wall in the planning room, watching as the design for the Taj Mahal takes shape. The first thing to understand is that there was no single architect in the modern sense of the word. The creation of a major Mughal building was a collaborative process, overseen by a board of imperial supervisors who reported directly to the emperor. Shah Jahan himself was the ultimate creative director, but he relied on a team of specialists to translate his vision into reality. As you look at the master plans being drawn up on parchment, you can see the fusion of different traditions. The overall concept, a large, domed mausoleum at the center of a four-part garden, is a direct descendant of Humayun's tomb. The choice of pure white marble and the use of exquisite pietra dura inlay are taken directly from the jewel box tomb of Edimid, UDOLAH. But here, everything is being refined, perfected, and scaled up to an unimaginable degree. The design team is a pan-imperial who's who of talent. While records are frustratingly incomplete, court histories and local traditions give us a few names. Astadamad Lahori is the name most frequently mentioned as the principal architect. He was a Persian Indian architect of great renown, who would later go on to design the Red Fort in Delhi. But there are others. A dome specialist from the Ottoman Empire, possibly Ismail Efendi, was brought in to consult on the massive double-shelled dome, which was a huge engineering challenge. A master calligrapher, Aymanat Khan from Shiraz in Persia, was put in charge of designing the Quranic inscriptions that would adorn the building. Thousands of master craftsmen, as we've discussed, were brought in from across India and Central Asia. The project was a magnet for the best talent of the age. The core design brief, however, goes far beyond just creating a beautiful building. You listen as the court theologians and architects discuss the deeper meaning. The plan is not just to build a tomb, but to build a replica of a heavenly mansion, specifically a house for Mumtaz Mahal in paradise. But it's even more ambitious than that. The dominant academic theory, championed by scholars like Ebba Koch who have exhaustively studied the inscriptions and design, is that the Taj Mahal was conceived as a terrestrial model of the throne of God. This is the main branding message. A piece of sophisticated theological propaganda. The Quranic inscriptions chosen by Amenet Khan are not random. They are a carefully selected sequence that deals with themes of divine judgment, mercy, and the promise of paradise. The inscriptions that frame the main archways. For example, are from chapter 36 of the Quran, "Your sin," which is often recited in moments of death and speaks powerfully of resurrection. As a visitor walks through the gate and towards the tomb, they are literally walking through a narrative about passing from the material world into the spiritual realm. The entire complex is a carefully choreographed allegorical journey. Now for a wonderfully nerdy design detail. The whole complex is built on a principle of absolute, unwavering symmetry. The main tomb is flanked by two identical red sandstone buildings. One is a functioning mosque, facing west towards Mecca. The other, its perfect mirror image on the eastern side, is known as the Jawab, or answer. It has no religious function. It exists for one reason and one reason only: to maintain the architectural symmetry of the complex. The obsession with balance was so absolute that an entire, massive building was constructed just to be a mirror. This obsession with symmetry and heavenly symbolism has led to one of the most persistent and romantic debates about the Taj's design. Who was the true architect? While listed Ahmad Lahori is the most credible candidate. Legends have swirled for centuries. For a long time, a popular theory, pushed by a Spanish friar named Father Sebastian Manrique, was that the Taj was designed by a European, a Venetian Silvestre Geronimo Veronio. This theory was eagerly embraced by some colonial-era British historians, who perhaps found it difficult to believe that such a perfectly proportioned building could be created without European influence. However, there is zero credible evidence to support this. The design of the Taj is a clear and logical culmination of a century of Indo-Islamic and Persian architectural development. The Veronio theory is now almost universally rejected by serious historians. A fascinating case study in how historical narratives can be shaped by cultural biases. Back in the planning room, you see the final drawings being approved. A massive plinth to raise the tomb above the river. 4 graceful minarets, not attached to the building, but standing free at the corners of the plinth. And the great central dome, perfectly shaped like a pearl, ready to be crowned with a golden finial. The design is complete. It is a work of genius. A flawless synthesis of art, engineering, and theology. It is designed to be the ultimate statement of Shah Jahan's brand, a ruler of impeccable taste, profound piety, and the ability to command the resources of the earth to create a vision of heaven. The blueprint is ready. Now comes the truly monumental task of building it. The plans are approved. The vision is set. Now, the Imperial machine roars to life. You're no longer in the quiet planning rooms, but witnessing the logistical ballet of the 17th century. Building the Taj Mahal wasn't just an artistic endeavor. It was a colossal feat of project management and supply chain logistics that showcased the immense reach and organizational power of the Mughal Empire. The brand wasn't just in the final product. It was in the process itself. You are standing at a dusty crossroads miles outside of Agra. Tailong, slow-moving caravan is approaching. The creak of wooden wheels and the lowing of oxen fill the air. This is the Imperial supply chain in action. The primary material, the soul of the project, is the pristine white marble. This isn't just any marble. It's Macrane marble, a specific type known for its luminous quality and durability, which doesn't yellow with age. The quarries of Macrane are in Rajasthan, over 400 kilometers away. Getting the massive blocks of marble from the quarry to the construction site was a monumental task. Each block, weighing several tons, had to be hewn from the rock, loaded onto specially constructed carts, and then pulled by teams of dozens of oxen and elephants. They moved at a crawl, traveling along purpose-built trans-and-temporary roads. A specially commissioned fleet of over 1,000 elephants was used for the heaviest lifting and transport. Just the act of quarrying and transporting the marble was a massive expense and a project in itself, a clear demonstration of the empire's ability to mobilize resources on a vast scale. But the marble was just the beginning. The pietra dura inlay work, the painting with stones, required a palette of precious and semi-precious gem sorts from all over the known world. This is where the tomb becomes a map of the Mughal Empire's global reach and trade connections. You watch as other caravans arrive, their cargo even more precious. The lapis lazuli, the deep, celestial blue, was brought from the mines of Badakhon in what is now northeastern Afghanistan. A perilous journey over mountain passes. The vibrant turquoise came from Tibet. The jade and crystal were sorts from Central Asia. From the fabled city of Kashgar on the Silk Road, the carnelian, a rich, reddish orange, came from Gujarat in India. The jasper was brought from the Punjab. Sapphires were shipped from Ceylon, modern Sri Lanka, and coal and sandstone for construction were sorts more locally. The project managers of the Taj were, in effect, running a global import-export business dedicated to a single building. Each stone set into the walls was a testament to the empire's influence and commercial power. Here's a fantastic little detail that shows the level of organization involved. How did they feed the more than 20 Hazaru workers, the artisans, the laborers, the foremen, for 2 decades? A whole new town, named Mumt Sebed now Tajganj, sprang up around the construction site. It was a bustling city in its own right, with markets, houses, and mosques. The state had to ensure a constant supply of grain and food to this massive population. The revenue from 30 villages in the surrounding area was specifically assigned to pay the salaries of the workers and fund the construction. This shows that the tomb wasn't just a work of art. It was a major economic engine, redirecting vast amounts of agricultural and commercial wealth into a single, concentrated project. The sheer cost of all this has been a subject of historical debate for centuries. How much did the Taj Mahal actually cost to build? There is no simple answer, because 17th century accounting doesn't translate easily into modern currency. The court chroniclers give a figure of around 5 million rupees at the time. Trying to convert this is a fool's errand. Is it based on the value of silver, the price of gold, or the cost of labor? Historians have come up with wildly different estimates, ranging from a modest 50 million to over $1 billion in today's money. The debate is almost meaningless. The better way to think about it is in terms of purchasing power. The cost was so astronomical that it represented a significant percentage of the entire imperial budget for over 20 years. It was a statement of wealth so profound that its exact cost is almost irrelevant. The point was that the emperor could afford it. You walk through the bustling temporary city of Mumt Sebad. You see a Persian artisan haggling with a local merchant over the price of spices. You see a stone carver from Radishan sharing a meal with a laborer from a nearby village. The construction site was a melting pot, a place where the diverse peoples of the empire were brought together in a single, unified effort. The logistical brilliance of the Taj Mahal-esque construction is an often overlooked part of its story. It's the invisible scaffolding that holds up the beautiful facade. It demonstrates that the Mughal brand wasn't just about aesthetics. It was about competence. It was a message to rivals and subjects alike that this was an empire that could not only dream of paradise but could also manage the complex, mundane, earthly details required to actually build it. The supply chain was the prose that made the poetry of the architecture possible. You are standing on the main stone causeway, looking towards the Taj Mahal. The building appears before you, a vision of perfect symmetry and flawless beauty. It seems simple, straightforward, almost inevitable in its design. But this apparent simplicity is a lie. It is the result of some of the most sophisticated and subtle optical illusions ever employed in architecture. The designers of the Taj were not just builders. They were master psychologists of perception, using clever tricks of the eye to enhance the building's emotional impact and create an illusion of divine perfection. Let's start with your first impression. You walk through the main gate. The door was eye-rousing. The gate itself is a massive, magnificent structure of red sandstone. As you stand in the archway, it perfectly frames the tomb in the distance. And here, the first trick begins. As you walk away from the gate and towards the tomb appears to get larger at a much faster rate than you'd expect. It grows in your field of vision, quickly filling the frame, creating a sense of awe and drawing you forward. Conversely, as you leave and walk back towards the gate, looking over your shoulder, the tomb appears to stay with you, seeming not to shrink as quickly as it should. It's a trick of forced perspective, designed to make the experience of approaching and leaving the tomb more dramatic and memorable. Now, look at the 4 minarets that stand at the corners of the marble plinth. They look perfectly upright, for sentinels standing at attention. They are not. The designers knew that perfectly vertical towers can sometimes appear to be leaning inwards to the human eye. To counteract this, they built the 4 minarets so that they are leaning ever so slightly outwards. The tilt is only a few degrees, completely imperceptible to the casual observer. This subtle outward lean does 2 things. First, it creates the optical illusion of them being perfectly straight. Second, it serves a brilliant structural purpose. In the event of an earthquake, a real threat in this region, the minarets are designed to fall away from the main tomb, protecting the precious central dome from being damaged. It's a genius piece of engineering disguised as an aesthetic choice. Next, you need to look at the calligraphy again, but this time with an eye for scale. You've already learned that the Mughals were masters of adjusting the size of script to create an illusion of uniformity. And the Taj Mahal, this technique reaches its zenith. The bands of black marble script that frame the soaring arches contain verses from the Quran to someone standing on the ground. The letters at the top of the 30-meter-high arch look exactly the same size as the letters at the bottom. This is, of course, impossible. The artisans painstakingly and brilliantly increased the size of the letters and the spacing between them as they moved up the arch. The script at the top is significantly larger than the script at the bottom, but the transition is so masterfully handled that the eye is completely full. The intended effect is to present the sacred text as something perfect and divinely ordered, not subject to the messy distortions of human perspective. Even the main dome itself is part of an illusion. The massive, onion-shaped dome that you see is the outer shell, designed for maximum visual impact on the skyline. But from inside the mausoleum, the ceiling is a much lower, more intimate, and proportionally appropriate dome. This double dome system, which the Mughals had used before, allows for a building that is both monumental on the outside and human-scaled on the inside. But the shape of the Taj's dome is so perfect, its curves so exquisitely calculated, that it has become the archetype of its form. The purpose of these subtle tricks has long fascinated architects and historians. Are they just clever technical solutions to perceptual problems, or is there a deeper meaning? The dominant interpretation is that these illusions are a core part of the tomb's theological message. The world we perceive is flawed and imperfect. Our senses can be tricked. The Taj Mahal, through its use of optical corrections, presents a vision of a higher reality, a divine perfection that transcends the limitations of human perception. It's designed to make you feel like you are experiencing something not entirely of this world. The debate among scholars is not if these illusions exist. They are well documented, but how much conscious theological intent was behind every single decision? Were the builders following a master plan of symbolic illusions, or were they simply applying the highest level of craftsmanship and best practices they knew to solve aesthetic problems? As you walk around the marble plinth, the building seems to change with the light. At dawn, it's a soft, pearly pink. In the midday sun, it's a dazzling, almost blinding white. In the evening, it becomes a soft, golden orange, and under the full moon, it glows with an ethereal, silvery light. This, too, a part of the design. The choice of Macaroni marble, which is highly translucent, was intended to make the tomb a living canvas for the changing light of the sky. It is never static. It is always in a state of transformation, a reflection of the divine in the natural world. This chameleon icy quality is perhaps its greatest trick, a building that seems as alive and ephemeral as the love it was built to commemorate. You are standing on the opposite bank of the Yamuna River, in a moonlit garden known as the Madhab Bay, or Moonlight Garden. From here, you have a perfect, symmetrical view of the Taj Mahal, its white marble form reflected in the dark, still waters of the river. It's from this spot that one of the most romantic and enduring myths about the Taj was born. The legend of the Black Taj. The story is seductive and beautifully symmetrical. It goes like this. Shah Jahan, not content with building a peerless white marble tomb for his wife, intended to build an exact replica for himself on the opposite bank of the river, but constructed entirely of black marble. The two tombs were to be connected by a magnificent bridge, symbolizing the eternal bond between the emperor and his empress, a bridge between love and death, light and darkness. This grand project was supposedly interrupted by his son, Aurangzeb, who overthrew his father and imprisoned him in Agra fort before the Black Taj could be built. Shah Jahan, the story concludes, spent his final years gazing from his prison window at the sight of his unfulfilled dream. It's a fantastic story. It's dramatic, romantic, and it feeds our love for what-if historical scenarios. For centuries, this legend was repeated as fact by tour guides, travelers, and even some early historians. It seemed to make perfect sense of the ruins of the Motab Beg and the emperor's known obsession with symmetry. But as you look around the excavated foundations of the Moonlight Garden, you're actually standing on the evidence that debunks this myth. The idea of the Black Taj is almost certainly a wonderful, poetic fiction. The main piece of evidence comes from the work of modern archaeologists. In the 1992, extensive excavations were carried out in the Motab Beg. They were searching for any trace of a black marble foundation or building materials. They found nothing of the sort. Instead, they unearthed a clear footprint of a classic char bag garden, complete with fountains, pavilions, and water channels. It became clear that the Motab Beg was not the foundation for a second tomb, but a pleasure garden, perfectly aligned with the Taj Mahal, designed to be the ideal spot from which to view the main mausoleum. Especially at night, the black ruins that early travelers saw were likely the decaying remnants of the garden's pond, lined with dark stones that appeared black over time. So where did this captivating myth come from? The first written mention of it comes from the travelogues of a French traveler named Jean-Baptiste Tavernier, who visited Agra in the 1652. During the time of Shah Jahan's reign, Tavernier writes that Shah Jahan began to build his own tomb on the other side of the river, but the war with his sons interrupted his plan. Tavernier was a jeweler by trade, not a historian, and was prone to repeating court gossip and rumors. His single, brief mention is the only contemporary account that exists. Known Mughal court histories, which meticulously documented Shah Jahan's other building projects, never mention a plan for a black marble mausoleum. Here's a slightly nerdy but crucial detail that further undermines the legend. The logistics. Black marble, unlike the white macrame marble, is not a material that lends itself well to the kind of fine, detailed carving and inlays seen on the Taj. It's geologically harder and more brittle. To build an identical structure from it would have been an engineering nightmare, if not an impossibility with 17th century technology. Furthermore, the cost would have been even more astronomical than the original Taj, at a time when the empire was already feeling the financial strain of Shah Jahan's endless projects. Embarking on a second, even more challenging tomb seems highly improbable. The debate about the Black Taj among historians is now largely settled. While it remains a potent and popular myth, the scholarly consensus is that it never existed as a serious plan. The discussion now focuses more on why the myth was so powerful and persistent. It speaks to our desire for narrative closure and symmetry. It provides a convenient, dramatic reason for the Motab Beg HS existence, and it adds another layer of tragedy to Shah Jahan's story, casting him as a thwarted romantic genius and his son Aurangzeb as the heartless pragmatist who destroyed his beautiful dream. So the story of the Black Taj is not a history of architecture, but a history of storytelling. It's a piece of folklore that has attached itself to a real place. It shows how myths can become more powerful than facts, especially when they are more romantic. You look back across the river at the real Taj Mahal, glowing under the moon. The reflection on the water is dark, a fleeting, shimmering black Taj that lasts only as long as the light and the water are still. Perhaps this is the only Black Taj that was ever meant to be. Not a building of stone, but a poetic reflection, a transient echo of the perfect form on the other shore. The dream of a black Taj wasn't Shah Jahan's. It was ours. We invented it because the real story, as magnificent as it is, was somehow not quite symmetrical enough for the legend we wanted to tell. The year is 1653. After more than 2 decades of relentless work, it is finished. The scaffolding is down, the gardens are planted, and the last piece of polished jasper has been set into place. You are standing before the completed Taj Mahal, seeing it as a 17th century visitor would have, with fresh eyes, unburdened by the millions of photographs and postcards of the future. You are here to read the final, complete brand statement, to understand the full power of the message that Shah Jahan has spent a fortune and a lifetime to create. The experience is a carefully managed journey, a masterclass in environmental storytelling. You begin at the main gateway. The door was a high-rousier. It is a colossal structure in its own right, a monument of red sandstone and white marble that serves as a dramatic overture. As you pass through its dark, octagonal chamber and step out into the light, the mausoleum is revealed in its entirety, perfectly framed. The effect is breathtaking, a sudden, overwhelming vision of beauty. This is the moment of awe, designed to stop you in your tracks and silence your mind. You walk along the central causeway, the tomb reflected in the long water channel before you. The 4-part charbagh garden surrounds you, a vision of paradise on earth. It's lush, green, and orderly. The sound of the fountains and the scent of the flowers isolate you from the chaotic world you just left behind. You are being cleansed, prepared for the sacred space ahead. This part of the journey reinforces the message of the Emperor's power to create order and beauty, to bring a piece of heaven down to his own realm. As you get closer, you begin to appreciate the details. The surfaces are not just flat white. They are alive with decoration. You see the elegant bands of Quranic calligraphy, which you now know are a narrative of judgment and salvation. You see the delicate, stylized floral sprays, carved in low relief and inlaid with precious stones, the Imperial logo of Shah Jahan's reign. The message here is one of refinement, wealth, and piety. This is not the brutal power of a fortress. It is the sophisticated power of a dynasty that commands not just armies, but the highest forms of art. You finally ascend the marble plinth and stand at the base of the mausoleum itself. The scale is immense, yet it doesn't feel oppressive. It feels ethereal, almost weightless, thanks to the luminous quality of the marble and the graceful curves of the dome and arches. You run your hand over the wall, and it's cool and smooth as silk. The craftsmanship is flawless. There are no visible joints. This is the message of perfection. It's a just so divine, not human, creation. It's a statement that the authority of the Mughal Emperor is as flawless and unquestionable as this building. Inside, the atmosphere changes. The dazzling light of the outside is replaced by a soft, filtered glow. Light enters through the intricate marble jolly screens, creating a serene and contemplative mood. In the center of the main chamber, surrounded by another octagonal screen of impossibly delicate latticework, are the cenotaphes of Taj Mahal and Shah Jahan. Mumtaz's cenotaph is in the perfect center of the room. Shah Jahan's, added later, is larger and placed to the side, the only symmetrical element in the entire complex. Here's a small but poignant detail. The cenotaphes you see, covered in exquisite inlay, are for public viewing. The real sarcophagi are in a plain, quiet crypt directly below, a space that was generally closed to the public. This separation between the public memorial and the private reality of burial is a key part of the design, maintaining a sense of sacred mystery. So, what is the final, unified message? It's a brilliant synthesis of personal and political propaganda. For the heart, it's the world's greatest love story, a testament to a husband's undying devotion. This is the story that ensures the building will be loved. For the mind, it's a statement of absolute power and limitless resources. It shows the reach of the empire, its technical prowess, and its staggering wealth. This is the story that ensures the dynasty will be respected and feared. For the soul, it's a profound theological statement. It's a model of the throne of God, a map of paradise, and an allegorical journey towards salvation. This is a story that claims divine sanction from Mughal rule. The debate among historians about which of these messages was primary is ongoing. Did Shah Jahan intend for it to be seen primarily as a symbol of love? Or was it just clever marketing for a monument that was fundamentally about imperial power and theology? The genius of the Taj is that it is all of these things at once. It works on every level. It is the perfect piece of propaganda because it makes its political and theological message emotionally irresistible. You are so captivated by the love story and the beauty that you absorb the messages of power and divinity without even realizing it. You stand back and look at the whole complex one last time. It is the culmination of a century of Mughal architectural branding. It has the garden concept of Babur, the scale and dome of Humayun, the inlay techniques of Nur Jahan, and the obsession with perfection of Shah Jahan. It is the final, definitive statement of the brand, an empire at the absolute peak of its confidence and creative power. It is a message frozen in stone and jewels, a declaration that the Mughal dynasty is eternal. But, of course, nothing is. The air in the imperial court has grown cold and sharp. The opulent, almost decadent, aesthetic of Shah Jahan's reign has come to an abrupt and final end. The brand is about to undergo its most dramatic and hostile rebranding yet. You are now witnessing the rise of Aurangzeb, Shah Jahan's third son. He is a man forged in a different fire, a brilliant military strategist, a ruthless politician, and a devout, austere, and deeply conservative Sunni Muslim. He is the CEO who looks at his father's extravagant spending and sees not a legacy of beauty, but a crisis of fiscal irresponsibility and religious laxity. In 1658, while Shah Jahan is still alive, Aurangzeb marches on Agra. He defeats his brothers in a brutal war of succession, a conflict far bloodier than the one that brought his father to power. He then does the unthinkable. He deposes his own father. Shah Jahan, the king of the world, the great builder, is placed under house arrest in the luxurious marble pavilions of Agra Fort. For the last 8 years of his life, he can only gaze across the river at his masterpiece, the Taj Mahal, a prisoner in his own palace, with Aurangzeb's ascension to the throne, taking the title Islamic or conqueror of the world. The imperial priorities shift dramatically. The state-sponsored branding campaign that was Mughal architecture is, for all intents and purposes, cancelled. Aurangzeb sees the colossal expenditure on tombs and palaces as a wasteful indulgence that has drained the treasury and, more importantly, deviates from the path of Orthodox Islam. He is a pragmatist, a micromanager, and a military man. The budget for art and architecture is slashed and reallocated to the army. You are in his court now. The atmosphere is stark, serious, and businesslike. The colorful brocades and jewels of Shah Jahan's era are replaced with simple white garments. Music and dance are banned from the court. The emperor himself a life of monkish austerity, mending his own clothes and, famously, copying the Quran by hand to earn a small personal income. His brand is not about creating paradise on earth. It's about piety, orthodoxy, and military expansion. This is not to say that he stopped building entirely. An emperor must still project power, but his architectural commissions are telling. He builds the magnificent Badshah Mosque in Lahore. It is a vast, powerful, and impressive structure, one of the largest mosques in the world, but it is built primarily of red sandstone, a deliberate and symbolic return to the more martial, less extravagant aesthetic of Akbar's time. It is a building for public prayer and the assertion of Islamic authority, not a jewel-encrusted memorial to an individual. It's a public utility, not a personal brand statement. Now for the quirky detail that perfectly encapsulates Aurangzeb's character. When his first wife, Dio Banu begun, dies, his, by all accounts, deeply grave, his son, Princess Shah, pressures him to commission a mausoleum for her, a monument befitting an empress. Aurangzeb reluctantly agrees. The result is the Bika Mekubare, which you will see later, built in the city of Aurangabad. But the key here is the budget. While Shah Jahan poured the wealth of the empire into the Taj Mahal, Aurangzeb granted his son a famously meager budget for his mother's tomb. The records show he allocated a relatively paltry sum, around 700 Jaro rupees. He was essentially forced into this act of memorization, and he made sure it was done on the cheap. It was an act of branding, yes, but it was a budget branding exercise, a pale imitation of his father's masterpiece. This shift in imperial patronage has led to a major historical debate about Aurangzeb's legacy. For centuries, he has been portrayed as the villain of the Mughal story, the puritanical fanatic who imprisoned his romantic father, destroyed Hindu temples, and through his harsh policies, initiated the decline of the empire. This narrative casts his rejection of art and architecture as a sign of his cultural barbarism. However, many modern historians have worked to revise this simplistic view. They argue that Aurangzeb was a complex and pragmatic ruler facing an entirely different set of challenges than his predecessors. The empire was overstretched, facing constant rebellions, particularly from the rising wrath of power in the Deccan. His austerity wasn't just a matter of personal piety. It was a necessary fiscal correction after the excesses of Shah Jahan's reign. His focus on the military and administration was a rational response to the growing threats to the empire's stability. In this view, his decision to cut the arts budget was not an act of Philistinism, but a responsible CEO making tough choices to keep the company solvent. This reevaluation doesn't excuse his intolerance, but it complicates the picture, portraying him as a man of his time rather than a two-dimensional villain. You see him in his office, poring over tax revenues and military dispatches. He has no time for poetry or discussions of architectural aesthetics. His life is a constant battle to hold together a vast and increasingly fractured empire. The soft power of brand building through beautiful tombs is a luxury he believes the empire can no longer afford. He is swapping it for the hard power of the sword and the law. His reign marks the end of an era. The great workshops of the marble carvers and inlay artists are disbanded. The master craftsmen move on, their skills no longer in high demand by the imperial court. The creative energy that had produced a century of architectural wonders dissipates. The Mughal brand, once synonymous with unparalleled beauty and cultural sophistication, is now being rebuilt on a foundation of religious orthodoxy and military might. The age of the great tombs is over. Your journey takes you south, away from the traditional Mughal heartland of the Gangetic Plain and into the rugged, volcanic landscape of the Deccan Plateau. You have arrived in the city of Aurangabad, a place named after the emperor himself, a strategic military base for his seemingly endless campaigns against the Maratha kingdoms. It is here, in this provincial capital, that you will witness the fading echo of the great Mughal architectural brand. Before you stands the Bibiko Ametyu Bare, the tomb of Aurangzeb's wife, Dil Rasbonu Bigo. From a distance, the family resemblance is unmistakable. It has the central dome, the four minarets, the garden layout, and the main gateway. It is explicitly designed to look like the Taj Mahal, but as you get closer, the illusion shatters. If the Taj Mahal is a flawless diamond, this is a piece of glass. It is a poignant, almost tragic attempt to replicate a masterpiece on a shoestring budget. The tomb was commissioned by Aurangzeb's son, Prince Shah, in memory of his mother. As you know, Aurangzeb, ever the pragmatist, granted him a very limited budget, and it shows. The main structure is not sheathed entirely in pristine white marble. Marble was used for the main dome and for the lower sections of the walls, but to save money, much of the rest of the building is constructed from a cheaper, less refined basalt, which has been covered in a polished lime plaster called stucco. From afar, it mimics the look of marble, but up close, it lacks the luminosity and permanence. Over the centuries, the plaster has chipped and discolored, revealing the duller stone beneath. You walk through the main gateway and into the garden. The layout is a classic chawbag, but it feels less grand, less perfectly maintained than the gardens of its predecessors. The proportions of the building itself feel off. The minarets are too slender for the main building, the dome a little too squat. The architects, one of whom was named Allah, the son of the Taj Mahal's reputed chief architect, stood amid Lahori were clearly trying to copy the famous original, but they lacked the resources, and perhaps the genius, to capture its perfect harmony. It's like hearing a familiar song played slightly out of tune. Now for the specific detail that really tells the story. You get up close to the walls and look at the decorations. Instead of the breathtakingly intricate and expensive pietra dura inlay of the Taj, where real semi-precious stones were used, much of the ornamentation on the Bibika Mekubare is molded stucco work. The floral patterns and geometric designs are not inlaid. They are carved into the plaster. Well skillful, it has none of the richness, color, or subtlety of true inlay. It's a shortcut, a cost-saving measure that speaks volumes. The empire that once decorated its walls with jewels can now only afford to imitate them in plaster. This building is often derisively called the poor man's Taj, a nickname that is both cruel and accurate. But its very existence, and its flaws, have made it a fascinating subject for architectural historians. Is the Babika Mekubari a symbol of the decline of the Mughal Empire? A final, failed attempt at greatness? Or should it be viewed in a more positive light? Some historians argue that we shouldn't judge it against the impossible standard of the Taj Mahal. Instead, they suggest we see it as a significant work of late Mughal architecture in its own right. It demonstrates that even with limited resources and a shift in imperial taste, the architectural traditions of the empire were still alive. It is the most important monument of Orange possess, long reigning a testament to a son's love for his mother. The debate centers on whether it should be defined by what it isn't the Taj or appreciated for what it is, a unique and poignant building from a different era. You step inside the main mausoleum. At the center, on the ground floor, is the Empress's grave, surrounded by a simple but elegant octagonal marble screen. It's a quiet, humble space. Unlike the tombs of the great emperors, you can look down from the main level and see the actual sarcophagus below. There is a sense of accessibility and intimacy here that is absent in the grander, more formal tombs of Agra and Delhi. Standing here, you can feel the story of the empire's changing fortunes. The Bibika Mekubare is a monument to a new reality. The boundless confidence and wealth of Shurya Hunsura are gone. The empire is now fighting for its survival. Bogged down in endless wars in the Deccan, the brand can no longer afford the spectacular, flawless image-making of the past. It has to make do. The vision is still there, the memory of what the brand should look like. But the resources to execute it perfectly have vanished. It is a melancholy beauty. It's the beauty of a fading photograph, a memory of a more glorious time. The Bika Mekubare is the last great Mughal tomb. It is the final, sputtering flame of a branding campaign that had once burned with the intensity of a star. After this, there would be no more grand mausoleums. The story of the Mughal tombs, which began with such ambition, ensue not with a bang, but with a wistful sigh. The long, slow twilight of the Mughal Empire has begun. Orange possess reign, which lasted nearly 50 years, was a constant struggle to hold the vast, unwieldy empire together. After his death in 1707, the fragile unity he had maintained through sheer force of will finally shatters. You are about to witness the brand, so carefully constructed over the centuries, finally crumble into irrelevance. The grand statements of permanence carved in stone now seem like hollow boasts in a world that is rapidly changing. You are no longer in the serene, ordered world of the Imperial court. You are a ghost in a landscape of chaos. The years following Orange-possessed death are a blur of weak rulers, short-lived reigns, and vicious wars of succession. The emperors who sit on the throne in Delhi are often puppets, controlled by powerful nobles or rival factions. The Manasabidari system, which had once been the steel frame of the empire, has broken down. Nobles entrench themselves in their JAGIRS, treating them as hereditary kingdoms and refusing to send revenue back to the central treasury. The money has run out, The physical symbols of the brand, the great tombs and palaces, begin to suffer, with no central funds for their upkeep. The vast gardens become overgrown. The water channels run dry. The delicate inlay work is neglected, and stones begin to fall from the walls. The eternal monuments are subject to the slow, relentless decay of time and neglect. Then comes the first catastrophic blow. It is 1739. The Persian Emperor, Nader Shah, a brilliant and ruthless conqueror, sweeps into India. Drawn by the legendary wealth of the Mughals, he meets the hopelessly disorganized Mughal army near the city of Karnal and annihilates them. A few weeks later, he enters Delhi. At first, the occupation is peaceful, but when a rumor spreads that Nader Shah has been assassinated, the citizens of Delhi rise up and kill some of his soldiers. His revenge is swift and terrible. He unleashes his army on the city in a single day of brutal massacre and plunder. The city that was the jewel of the Mughal Empire becomes a charnel house. But, for Nader Shah, the ultimate prize is the Mughal treasury. He systematically strips the Red Fort of 2 centuries of accumulated wealth. He takes everything. This includes the legendary Peacock Throne, a solid gold, jewel-encrusted masterpiece commissioned by Shah Jahan, the ultimate symbol of Mughal power. It is dismantled and carted away to Persia, never to be seen in its original form again. When Nader Shah finally leaves Delhi, he takes with him a caravan of treasures so vast it beggars belief. Thousands of elephants and camels loaded with gold, silver, and jewels. The economic back of the empire is broken. Here is a poignant and specific detail of the sack of Delhi. Nader Shah's troops did not spare the sacred spaces. They ransacked the tombs of the great emperors and nobles around the city, searching for hidden treasures. There are accounts of them prying the precious stones from the Senate office and even digging up the graves themselves. It was a profound act of desecration. The tombs, designed as inviolable, sacred statements of dynastic permanence, were proven to be just stone buildings, vulnerable to the greed of a stronger power. The brand message of divine protection and eternal glory was rendered utterly meaningless. The sack of Delhi by Nader Shah is a turning point. It shatters the aura of Mughal invincibility forever. The emperor in Delhi is now ruler in name only. Real power has shifted to the provinces, to the rising Maratha Confederacy, to the various regional Nawabism is a mess, and, most ominously, to the European trading companies that are slowly but surely expanding their influence. The historical debate here is not about if the empire declined, but why and when it started. Was the decline inevitable, a natural result of imperial overstep? Did it begin with arranged, possessed, divisive policies and endless wars, which alienated large parts of the population and bankrupted the state? Or was the decline a much faster process, a direct result of the catastrophic invasions from Persia and, later, Afghanistan, which destroyed the empire's remaining wealth and authority? Historians argue passionately about the long-term structural causes versus the short-term catastrophic events. The truth is likely a combination of both. A body weakened by internal sickness that was finally killed by a series of external blows. You stand in the ruins of a Delhi marketplace after Nader Shah's departure. The silence is heavy. The great Mughal brand, which once stood for wealth, sophistication, and divine order, is now a symbol of weakness and decay. The magnificent tombs that you have visited, Humayun's, Akbar's, and even the mighty Taj Mahal, no longer feel like confident statements of power. They feel like relics of a lost golden age. Their message of permanence has been exposed as a lie. They are no longer active pieces of propaganda. They are becoming what they are today, historical monuments. Their meaning is about to be rewritten by a new set of rulers, who are watching this chaos from their trading posts on the coast, ready to pick up the pieces. The haze of the 18th century, thick with the smoke of cannons and the dust of crumbling palaces, begins to clear. A new power is asserting itself, a power unlike any India has seen before. They did not arrive on horseback through the Khyber Pass. They came on tall ships, flying the flag of the British East India Company. You are now seeing the Mughal tombs through a new set of eyes. and these eyes will once again completely rebrand the monuments, giving them a new meaning for a new era. At first, in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, the British were just one power among many, jostling for influence in the chaotic aftermath of the Mughal collapse. For the early company officials, artists, and travelers, the great Mughal tombs were objects of immense fascination. They saw them as romantic, picturesque ruins. They commissioned beautiful, melancholic paintings of the Taj Mahal or Humayun's tomb, often depicted with overgrown gardens and crumbling walls. This was the era of the Romantic movement in Europe, which had a fascination with sublime decay and the grandeur of fallen empires. For then, the Mughal ruins were the Indian equivalent of the Roman for the temples of ancient Greece, evidence of a glorious past that had vanished. You see a British artist with his sketchbook, sitting in the gardens of Sikri. He is carefully drawing Akbar's tomb, but he adds extra vines creeping up the walls and perhaps a few moody clouds in the sky. The message of these images was for the European audience. It said, "Look at this once mighty empire that is now in ruins. Their time is past." Subtly, it also implied, "Our time is beginning." This picturesque interpretation stripped the tombs of their original political and theological meaning and turned them into decorative, nostalgic landscapes. Then comes the great turning point, the Indian Rebellion of 1857. After this bloody conflict, the British Crown takes direct control from the East India Company, and the last Mughal emperor, the poet King Bahadur Shah Zafar, is exiled to Burma. The Mughal Empire is officially over. Now, the British are not just traders, they are the undisputed rulers of the new British Raj, and their relationship with the Mughal monuments changes. The tombs are no longer just romantic ruins. They are symbols of the defeated dynasty that the British have replaced. This is where the rebranding becomes more active and, at times, quite bizarre. During the late 19th century, the British began a program of restoring these monuments, led by figures like Lord Curzon, the Viceroy of India. On one hand, these efforts saved many buildings from complete ruin. Curzon, in particular, had a genuine passion for Indian architecture and spent a great deal of money cleaning up the Taj Mahal, restoring its gardens, and repairing its structures. But this restoration came with a new layer of branding. The British presented themselves as the responsible custodians of India's heritage, the ones who were saving the great monuments from the neglect of the natives. This was a powerful piece of imperial propaganda. It positioned the British as the rightful inheritors of the grand imperial tradition of India, suggesting that they were the logical successors to the Mughals. There's a famous and slightly cringe-worthy quote from Lord Curzon where he says that by restoring the buildings, the British were showing a reverent regard for the artistic treasures of the vanquished. It was a way of simultaneously honoring and patronizing the past. Here's a specific and rather odd detail from this era. During the 19th century, the Taj Mahal and other monuments were often used by the British for parties and social events. There are accounts of British officers and their wives having picnics and dances on the marble plinth of the Taj, with bands playing and champagne flowing. One British official even tried to have the tomb's precious marble dismantled and shipped to London to be sold off in pieces, a plan that was only stopped because the initial auction attempts failed. This casual, almost profane use of these sacred spaces shows a profound disconnect from their original meaning. The tombs were being repurposed as exotic backdrops for the social life of the new ruling class. The British interpretation of these monuments, however, has been a major point of contention for post-colonial historians. Was the British preservation effort a genuine act of appreciation for Indian culture, as figures like Curzon claim, or was it a cynical act of colonial appropriation, where the British took control of India's most important symbols, stripped them of their indigenous meaning, and reframed them to legitimize their own rule? Scholars argue that by tidying up the monuments and presenting them as pristine objects in a museum-like setting, the British were neutralizing their power and turning them from living symbols of a rival sovereignty into sanitized relics of a dead one. You watch as a group of British tourists in pith helmets and long dresses walks through the gardens of the Taj. They are listening to a guide explain the romantic story of Shah Jahan and Mumtaz Mahal. The complex political and theological messages of the building are being flattened, simplified into a single, easily digestible narrative. The tomb is no longer a statement about the throne of God or the power of the Mughal state. It is becoming a simple love story, a rebranding that makes it safe, romantic, and politically neutral for the new rulers of India. The great propaganda pieces of the Mughal emperors were now being used as propaganda for a different empire, one from across the seas. The world spins forward. The British Raj, which once seemed as permanent as the Mughals before them, recedes into history. India gains its independence in 1947. The great tombs now belong to a new nation, a secular, democratic republic trying to forge its own identity from a complex and often painful past. You are now standing in the present day, amidst a throng of tourists, and you are about to witness the final, and perhaps most powerful, rebranding of them all. You are at the entrance to the Taj Mahal. The scene is one of vibrant, chaotic, modern life. The air is filled with the sound of tour bus engines, the insistent chatter of guides, the clicking of 1,000 cameras, and the mingling of languages from every corner of the globe. You are no longer a solitary, invisible observer. You are part of a crowd, a river of humanity flowing towards the famous gate. The tomb's brand is transformed once again. It is no longer a personal memorial, no longer a statement of imperial theology, no longer a romantic ruin or a symbol of colonial power. It has become a global icon. Its image is one of the most recognizable on the planet, up there with the Eiffel Tower and the pyramids of Giza. Its primary identity now is as India. For millions of people around the world, the silhouette of the Taj Mahal is India. It's the face of the country on travel posters, in advertisements, and in the global imagination. As you walk through the complex, you see the modern machinery of tourism at work. There are ticket counters, security checks, and official photographers. You see visitors from all walks of life. Indian families on a day out, international tourists sticking a box on their bucket list, young couples taking selfies, and groups of school children listening, perhaps with some boredom, to their teacher. The message has been simplified to its most potent, universal essence. For the vast majority of the people here today, the Taj Mahal is one thing and one thing only, the world's ultimate symbol of love. The tragic story of Shah Jahan and Mumtaz Mahal, once just one layer of a complex narrative, has become the entire story. It's a story that transcends culture, language, and history. Everyone can understand love and loss. This romantic rebrand, which began in the colonial era, has been supercharged by modern mass media, popular culture, and the tourism industry. It's a much easier and more appealing story to sell than a complex lecture on 17th century political theology. Here's a small, modern detail that captures this transformation perfectly. Look at the benches. In the gardens, you will find a particular marble bench, strategically placed to offer the perfect photo opportunity with the Taj in the background. This bench is famously known as Lady Diana's bench. In 1992, Princess Diana was photographed sitting here alone, creating a poignant and globally famous image of solitary beauty. That photograph powerfully reinforced the Taj's identity as a place of romance and melancholy. Today, there is often a long queue of tourists waiting to replicate that exact photo. The bench, a simple piece of modern garden furniture, has become a tourist attraction in its own right, a site of pilgrimage for fans of the British royal family. Adding another strange, layered piece of branding onto the ancient monument, this modern identity of the Taj, however, is not without its controversies and debates. In contemporary India, the meaning of the Mughal past is a fiercely contested political issue. For some, the Taj Mahal is a proud symbol of India's rich, multicultural heritage, a testament to a golden age of art and architecture. They see it as a symbol of national pride and a vital source of tourist revenue. However, for some nationalist groups, the story is different. They see the Taj Mahal and other Mughal monuments as symbols of foreign invasion and subjugation. They argue that these Muslim rulers built their magnificent tombs by destroying Hindu temples and oppressing the native population. There have been repeated, though fringe, claims that the Taj was originally a Hindu temple named Taj Mahal. These claims have been thoroughly debunked by mainstream historians and archaeologists, but they persist in certain corners of the internet and political discourse. This debate over the true identity of the Taj shows that these buildings are not dead relics. They are still active participants in the modern culture wars, symbols that are fought over and reinterpreted to serve contemporary political agendas. You watch a young couple pose for a photo, forming a heart shape with their hands to frame the Great Dome. For them, in this moment, the building has no politics, no complex history. It is simply a beautiful backdrop for their own love story. The Great Tomb has become a mirror. It reflects whatever meaning we choose to project onto it. It is a screen upon which we play out our own narratives of love, nationhood, history, and identity. The original brand message of Shah Jahan, so specific and so carefully crafted, has been almost entirely overwritten. Or perhaps, in a way, his propaganda was too successful. He wanted to create a monument that would be eternal and admired by all. He succeeded beyond his wildest dreams, but that very success meant that its meaning could never remain his alone. It now belongs to everyone, and to no one. Your long journey through time is coming to an end. You've traveled from the dusty, chaotic streets of 16th century Akbar to the moonlit gardens of the Mughal, from the CEO-like ambition of an emperor to the silent diligence of an unnamed artisan. You have seen how a dynasty used stone and marble as a sophisticated to love public relations, crafting a brand image that has endured for centuries. Now, you stand for a final moment, reflecting on the full arc of the story. You are back where you started, in a sense, looking at a Mughal tomb. There could be any of them. Perhaps it's the imposing, confident gateway of Humayun's tomb, the first great statement of the restored dynasty. Perhaps it's the strange, domeless puzzle of Akbar's mausoleum at Sikri, a monument as complex as the man it houses. Or perhaps it is the Taj Mahal itself, shimmering in the afternoon light, the culmination of a century of artistic evolution. What you now understand is that these buildings are not silent. They are not just beautiful objects. They are historical documents, as rich and complex as any written text. They were designed to tell a very specific story. A story of power, piety, and permanence. Each tomb was a chapter in the ongoing branding saga of the Mughal Empire. Babur's humble garden was the prologue, establishing the core concept of paradise on earth. Humayun's tomb was the dramatic first chapter, a statement of resilience and renewed ambition. Akbar's projects were a bold exploration of a new, syncretic corporate identity. The work of Jahangir and Noor Jahan was a pivot to luxury, elegance, and refinement. Then Shah Jahan's reign was the climax, the moment the brand achieved a level of perfection and global recognition that would make it immortal. The tombs were, in essence, a form of state-sponsored advertising. The target audience was twofold. The first audience was the empire's subjects and rivals. To them, the massive scale, the expensive materials, and the flawless craftsmanship sent a clear message. We are the Mughals. We are impossibly wealthy, technologically advanced, and our rule is sanctioned by God. Do not challenge us. It was a campaign of armed intimidation. The second, and perhaps more important, audience was posterity. The emperors knew their lives were fleeting and their power was fragile. By building these indestructible monuments, they were trying to conquer time itself. They were writing their own history in stone, ensuring that their names and their glory would not be forgotten. It was the ultimate personal branding exercise, a bid for immortality. Here's one final, curious detail for you to ponder. What happened to the tombs of the women of the dynasty? You've seen the tomb of Taj Mahal, of course, the most famous of all, and you know Noor Jahan built a tomb for herself. But scattered around the great imperial mausoleums are dozens of smaller, often anonymous tombs. These belong to the other wives, sisters, and the daughters of the emperors, for the most part. Their stories and their contributions are footnotes in the official histories, which were written by men, about men. The architectural legacy, like the written one, is overwhelmingly male-centric. The grand narrative of the empire was a story about its patriarchs. This brings us to the final, lingering question that historians will always grapple with. How do we, in the 21st century, reconcile the breathtaking beauty of these monuments with the often brutal reality of the system that created them? We can admire the delicate inlay of the Taj Mahal, but we must also remember that it was built using a system of power that relied on conquest, rigid social hierarchy, and the labor of thousands whose names are lost to history. Can we separate the art from the autocracy? There is no easy answer. The debate forces us to confront the complex and often uncomfortable relationship between culture and power. Great art is not always born from virtuous systems. Sometimes, the most beautiful flowers grow in the harshest soil. As you turn to leave, the setting sun casts a warm, golden light on the marble. The story of the Mughal brand is a powerful reminder that history is a process of constant reinterpretation. The meaning of these tombs has shifted with every generation that has looked upon them. They have been symbols of power, piety, love, duty, colonial appropriation, and national pride. Their ability to absorb and reflect these new meanings is perhaps the true secret to their permanence. They are no longer just propaganda for a long-dead dynasty. They are now part of a global conversation about history, beauty, and identity. And in the end, that may be a more powerful legacy than anything the emperors themselves could have ever imagined. The brand has outlived the company, and its message, whatever we choose it to be, still resonates. The light is very soft now. The sharp edges of the day have dissolved, and the world outside your window has fallen quiet. The journey is over. The echoes of chisel on marble have faded, replaced by a gentle, steady hum. You can feel the weight of your own body, safe and comfortable, a feeling of gentle gravity. Your mind, which has been wandering through gardens and palaces for so long, can finally come to rest. The stories are all told. The emperors and empresses, the artisans and architects, have all played their parts and have retreated into the quiet corridors of history. They are sleeping now, just as you are beginning to drift towards sleep. Let the images dissolve. Let the white marble soften into a gentle, silvery glow behind your eyelids. Let the intricate patterns of the lattice screens become the shifting, lovely patterns of your own drifting thoughts. You are floating now, on a slow, quiet river, much like the Yamuna that flows past the great tombs. The current is gentle, carrying you effortlessly into the peaceful landscape of your dreams. There is nothing left to do, nothing left to analyze, just the simple, quiet sensation of rest. The story has ended, and a deeper, more personal story, your own peaceful sleep, is just beginning. Breathe in, and let go. Breathe out, and drift away.